24 by 30s.
I love the feel of putting stuff up on the
Yeah.
wall, but I also recognize that that's actually asking people to print checks.
Right. Well, it's also asking people to have good eyesight, which I don't.
Okay, fair enough, yeah. All good reasons.
Okay.
So I love recycled paper, masking tape on a wall. I also am more than happy to do that. We can absolutely.
Okay. Cool. And I will, I'll send out an update. I haven't gotten a lot of confirmations yet. Just a couple, but I'll check in again. Hopefully it's.
Yeah, I mean, we have people, I know people get interested, but I also have so much time that it, you know, I mean, reassure people that it's not punk rock.
Yeah.
And this scenario is not the best thing, so that we about whether we even say anything about it.
Mm-hmm. Nope.
I think after. I just think we'll probably do a report back.
I think that makes sense. Yeah. Yeah. No.
O'clock, and I see some planning commissioners. I think we're ready to do some pre-discussion. I hope you're ready. I hope you have some pre-discussion energy. I don't. I have nothing. I would like to look at the agenda, kind of a live agenda. Maybe we'll get home early. It could happen. It could happen. Well, now we're doomed. So consent agenda. I've got not much on there, plus minutes. Ms. Russell, would you be willing to make a motion on that? Thank you. Only one public hearing, CDBG and home. I'm told that we've got draft motions that are coming that we will see soon. Questions on this?
Yes, we'll ask Mr. Ikefuna once he's finished with the other discussion
Great.
concerning the draft motions.
Historically, this is very boring, but I think we lost our CDBG manager this year. Is that true?
Ms.
Lost and
Attack,
gained.
yeah, she left, but there's a new grants administrator.
Who we love,
Mr. Warren.
and we love him.
He seems like a real nice guy.
Very good. We love
She's just not willing to commit to this life.
you. Sure. I mean, it takes time.
Well, you know,
Yeah, that's true. Okay, that's
I guess
fine.
she's willing to concede affection at this point.
I was a fan of the old one. Should have found
I think
out.
it's interdepartment rivalry.
I see.
Oh, I see. They're not in DS.
No,
Oh, we got to bring him into the fold.
okay.
Questions or concerns on CDBG? I haven't seen the motion, so I don't have any comments on those.
I guess we're gonna get a presentation.
We will get a presentation.
Okay.
Yes.
I was having a little bit of trouble following that.
I move to approve the staff's recommendation.
Probably. Historically, that would be accurate. Past that, so any questions or on that one? We understand that one?
Yeah, and if you look through it and notice an arithmetic error, I pointed that out, so.
Didn't do the math.
Right.
Friendly competition there.
There's a couple of those in there, actually.
I was,
Ouch.
yes, there are.
Okay.
No, this is
1709
my
preliminary
computer, this
discussion.
is that computer.
Questions on that?
So nothing
We will be
new.
having questions on that. No action needed, I don't think.
Right, so this is we're thinking about applying for an SUP, and this is what we think it's gonna look like, and what do you think of what we're thinking about?
That's my
We
understanding.
have tables.
Right.
for that.
Anything else on JPA? I think it's straightforward.
Oh,
Or it's not, and we'll find out.
We can adjust.
Okay. Transportation updates. So I have a question for you on this. How late do you want to go on this? Because I think we could actually go all night on transportation updates. Is that what you want? What do you want here?
So I feel like we can talk at length about transportation updates,
It's
but
true.
not necessarily those 3 transportation updates.
Okay, we're gonna focus.
I don't really have a lot on those,
Okay.
unless we're gonna
Ben, you
break
scared
down
yet?
into what's going on
Yeah.
with smart cell projects.
I mean, one suggestion after Mr. Sulligates and I talked about this, and Ben and I did as well, is that it's a good opportunity for him to be able to introduce himself as well as kind of where the program is right now, the program topics that he has as part of his memo, and then if there are other topics that you all have interest in, kind of gathering that, and we can invite him back again for another opportunity.
Does this make sense?
It does.
Mr. Schwartz, I'm looking at you.
Yes.
Very good. Okay, so it sounds like we won't go on that. That is a comfort to my heart.
Is there a possibility we could invite, I don't know, someone from Public Works who's, so less from the transportation planning side and more the transportation
Building.
implementation side, that, or has been able to give us an update on that at some point? The
Could give
the
you an
funding
update
stuff.
on that.
Okay, cool.
We're working across the departments to make sure we have our arms wrapped around all of that, so
Yep.
I'll be able to communicate that with you in the future.
Cool.
We get a lot of questions about that.
I'm sure you do.
We do.
Anything more about transportation? Big topic.
So we're all gonna take a scooter ride at the end of this presentation, right?
Mm-hmm.
Just to.
I
get a
thought we were
sense
going to
of it.
van scooters like parents.
Just around the room, I believe.
Mhm,
That's
yeah.
it. Ready to roll.
Yeah, you're right. You actually did.
You don't have to use your own scooters, I think you're within the geo fence. but-
Ah, yeah, true. Hmm.
We understand transportation?
It's all right, we got Phil's 1,000 watt
I
one.
think I understand the shape. Okay. Zoning, another big topic. Table of authority, a term I had not heard before.
So, we have been a little bit busy.
Yeah.
We are, of course, when we get to the main meeting, we're also going to repeat and continue to invite people to the open houses that are occurring later this week. So we've been preparing for those activities as well as trying to work through things with the consultants. So we don't have any new material on that for this evening.
Perfect.
But we have a plan of attack for the next work session.
We can also follow up on some of the things we discussed at the last work session, I would think.
I think 1709 will raise some questions we can talk about in respect to the new zoning, which it might not go to, but I think it does, which we could talk about during 1709 or during, yeah, I don't know.
Okay.
What was that phrase you just used?
Yeah, see, table
Yeah.
of authority.
Where did you
Where do you see that?
Someone told me it. You'll hear more about it later. This is a spoiler.
Oh, okay.
Table of authority. Tell your friends. Everybody's talking about it. Mr. Mitchell,
Or they will
do you
be.
have questions about the agenda? Really, what most of it.
None. It's pretty straightforward.
So yeah, so that's it. Are
Should
we
be-
right?
Should be a quick meeting.
Shush.
At the risk of spoiling it, do you want me to say what a table of authority is?
Please.
Beyond a
Everybody's
phrase
talking
that
about
sounds very cool.
It is evocative.
It is a table that would sit at the beginning of module 3 of that portion of the zoning ordinance, and it's basically a quick reference table that tells you, if I'm trying to do this, who do I go to? So if I'm trying to do a special use permit, I know that goes to planning commission and city council, right? If I'm trying to get a variance, I know that goes to the zoning administrator and the BZA. So it's a table of authority, quite literally.
So you can sort of workflow,
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah, I hope that didn't take the magic out of it, but that's all
It's
it
still
is.
magic.
Okay, great.
That is cool. I thought it was.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then you get to navigate the city's website to try and find those contact information.
Well, right, I was gonna say that the zoning ordinance will have a definition of each of those entities within it, so you can go and say, well, I don't know what this is, the BZA, and you can find that, what it is, but yet to contact them, you still have to. But we'll work on a webpage at some point as well.
Seeing as we, yeah, all right.
Any more about
I'll
zoning?
stop with the snark. For now.
Nothing on zoning, let's go. It's impossible
Maybe,
to imagine.
maybe we want to check back on process for housing this evening. Alex, I know that we received 2 presentations, so,
He does the new with the CDBG.
okay, so it's just one,
Yeah.
so just one presentation, and Patrick, you've got it straight with Patrick? Perfect, okay.
I think that's all I have on my list. Any other issues you'd like to raise at this time?
Hey.
I received an email from Mr. Habab about a possible joint work session with Albemarle County Planning Commission that I'd like to, I'll follow up with staff about. Broadly, I think it's a good idea.
I think the comp plan says we have to do it yearly, and they've been snubbing us for a while.
Yes, that's true.
As I understand it.
Yes.
They've had some staffing changes. So.
A good reminder. And my sense is that Chair Claiborne understands that this is a priority and it will benefit the region.
Great.
I have a tree commission question. There's a whole lot of trees with paper.
I have a piece of paper in my hand called Resolution Approval of the 2023-2028 5-Year Consolidated Plan for the Thomas Jefferson Area Home Consortium and the fiscal year 23-24 Annual Action Plan for the City of Charlottesville, with 2 paragraphs of text that you might hear later.
So the act is that we will, when we make the motion, if we decide to approve.
This is suggested language from staff.
We use this. Do you want to use that word?
Suggested motion. I'm not gonna make a motion. Chicken! You guys kidding. Why do they call the BAR motion?
Any additional questions for staff on the agenda for tonight? We could also do a short break.
Not on the agenda, but are we moving back into City Hall next month? Have you heard anything about that yet?
So we, I don't know about moving. I know that on the agenda for council next week, they are removing measures that have been in place concerning COVID, which will change some of our logistics. People won't have to sign up in order to come to our meetings and go through those processes. At this point in time, I'm not aware of a move. So as soon as we see what those materials look like, we'll outline and highlight for you guys, because it'll be a mystery to us as well. But we do know we're coming out of the pandemic realm of things, and so logistically things will kind of go back to how they were before, but we may still be here.
Status quo ante-pandemic. Anti-pandemonium?
Is that what we're calling that time period? An anti-pandemic?
Well, ante before.
Yeah.
Anti-pandemonium
Ah.
as opposed to antebellum.
Interesting.
I don't know.
Maybe. Historians will figure it out. Any additional questions on the agenda? I would also consider a short break.
I have a non-agenda question.
Please.
So as I'm walking down West Main Street today, there are a lot of trees that have tape around them. Does anybody on staff know are we about to lose a bunch of trees? I can email.
Long crowd.
Oh, wow, I can speak a little bit to that. We've lost a couple of trees. If you walk by the fountain, you'll notice that there are a number of trees that have been taken
I'm
down
not talking about
there.
the mall, I'm talking West Main.
Oh, West, oh, yeah,
They haven't been cut down yet, but it looks like.
I am not aware of our taking down any trees on West Main.
I
That would be
did
Parks and
talk
Rec.
to Steve about a month ago, and he mentioned some tree work on West Main. I don't remember if there were any removals or if they were just, I know a lot of them like needed just work that was
Yeah.
not removal.
I don't
Should
think
probably
we're
just
taking
ask.
down any on West Main. The ones we took down were on the mall.
Wait, are you now on tree commission or?
The Parks and Rec, he's tree.
Got it.
He's a tree dude.
Wait, why? Yes, you would know, okay.
We know too.
So, Kareem?
I don't know anything about it. I would defer to Steve Gates.
Wise. Additional questions about the agenda or related issues? I'd also entertain an idea for a short break. That's of interest.
Sure, really good.
Let's do a short break, resuming at 5:30 p.m. see 5:30 PM. Welcome all to the, oh boy, May 11th, 2023. Is it May? It's April?
Pretty sure we're still April.
April, very good. We're off to a great start. April 11th, meeting of the Charlottesville Planning Commission. I would like to start with commissioner reports. Mr. Mitchell, can you start us off right?
Yes, let me gather my notes.
Please.
Had a couple of meetings. The first was with Parks and Rec. They are as busy as always, but there were a couple of things that I thought I would bring to your attention. There was a presentation by Y Street, and that's a youth engagement group that is at least hubbed or at least based at CHS, and I think they may have other affiliates throughout the state of Virginia. And they did a wonderful little presentation called Share the Air. The objective is to be 100% tobacco and vape is the word, 100% vape free in all outdoor spaces, all parks, all public spaces. And I sent you guys the presentation that talks about that. There are a number of localities that have joined their campaign. It will be voluntary wherever they do this, and by any location that does this, because the Dillon rule does not allow us to say you gotta mandate that all public parks be tobacco and vape free. But you guys have the presentation on that. We talked about the budget submission. I've sent you guys the presentation on the budget submission as well. Mr. Bob, we were unsuccessful in getting the invasive species line item added. It's not going to make it this year. So we shall fight again next year for that. Just a note about staffing. We are at least 12 FTEs down, full-time vacancies that are vacant, and we're working to fill those, but it's been quite the effort. We are getting ready to open the pools in the very near future, and we're a little short, well, we're a lot short on lifeguards. But we have a mitigation plan. It looks like we are going to outsource or contract out the support for the Undersea pool. And we will then directly staff Washington Park and Smith Pool with our own people. Lots of other things going on, but I sent you guys the minutes, and I sent you guys all the PowerPoints that were done there. The LUPEC group met recently as well. There were 4 different conversations that were held there. The first was managed by UVA, and it was talking about transportation in and around Fontaine. That area will continue, the traffic will continue to grow as we continue to build out that area. And will be intensified by the onboarding of the biotech building that is on the way. UVA has undertaken an analysis that assesses what a full build-out would look like by 2025. And it's going to be pretty busy out there. They walked us through a pretty in-depth analysis of their data. And there's a little back and forth between UVA's data and VDOT's data, but we're working through that. But again, you guys have the PowerPoint presentation on that. I'd ask you to take a look at that because it's pretty detailed, pretty in-depth, and pretty enlightening. Another conversation was managed by the county, and this was walking us through what their comp plan update looks like. The tagline for their effort is called AC44, so it is a vision for 2024. The goals and themes and objectives and public feedback will be very familiar to you guys when you look at the PowerPoint presentation. So I'd ask that you guys look at it and you'll see, we've been there, we've done that, and we're going through that as well. Another presentation was about what they're doing with their ordinance. They also are they're modernizing their zoning ordinance. They're redoing their zoning ordinance. And they're doing that in conjunction with AC 44. And they're attempting to, the last time they updated it was 1980. And there have been 200 amendments to the ordinance since 1980. The modernization process is really a full-scale rewrite, right, the way I read it. And again, the things that they're doing will remind you of the things that James is attempting to do with our rewrite, to make it more readable, to make it more user-friendly, and to make it more streamlined. So again, I sent you the PowerPoint presentation on that. Again, it'll look very familiar to you. And the last thing that happened in the meeting was James and Mr. Freeze. He did a wonderful job of just updating the members. And again, the members are the county, UVA, Ravenna, Water and Sewage, City, and there's one other group that I'm forgetting, the foundation. Did a good job of just updating those guys on the work that we're doing. And he and the folks in the county have agreed to a little more collaboration, the county and UVA, as we work through our different comp plans.
Thank you. Mr. Durante.
Thank you. First, a question for Commissioner Mitchell. Did you actually verb hub? Used hub as a verb, to hub? They are hubbed out of?
I did verb hub, but I didn't mean to use the word hub because CHS is not the hub of Wise Street.
Okay.
But thanks for attempting to keep me honest and good.
Well, yeah, I'm appalled. Anyway, yes, few meetings crowded together at the end of March. First, the CAF committee has been went through several sessions, a total of 4, I believe. Late March, polishing off the HOPS, housing operations funding suggestions, which subsequently went to council with some adjustments to be made there. We have just wrapped up the decisioning on the CAF itself. We had $1.8 million in requests for $835,000. And I just got the minutes and memo on that at about 4:30 today for final polish. And then CDBG, as you know, met, and I was moving slow that day, and they appointed me chair, and we worked through the numbers and allotments last week there. And I think those are the main things I have. You're going to see a lot on the CDBG shortly.
Congratulations. I received an email, actually I think we all did, talking about some zoning suggestions from the HAC. Can you speak to that?
So, yeah, so the HAC made a series, so the HAC had its inaugural meeting, I guess that happened right after our last meeting. And in that meeting, Joy Johnson was elected chair, so the new boss is the same as the old boss. She was my predecessor. And she tasked a subcommittee to review Module 1 very briskly in advance of the work session to be held on the 29th, which they did. We have not adopted new bylaws in the HAC, so that the subcommittees officially don't have the power to say this is the product of the HAC. So until the HAC says this is our final product, it's not the final product. But it has been circulated and provided to staff at least.
Can you give us a brief overview?
So was not in that, I'm not a member of that subcommittee, but I did read it, and essentially it is privilege, affordable housing, much more, you get a very high multiple of density for making things predominantly affordable, 3 times, 4 times bonus. And essentially move height another 50% in privilege in most zones, and privilege with the privilege of affordable housing. That's the short version.
Thank you. The brevity is appreciated. Mr. Abad.
Don't get used to it.
I had 2 meetings. The first, the CTAC, Citizen Transportation Advisory Committee, met March 15th. We looked at the Long Range Transportation Plan 2050. I think we just got a review of it. We reviewed the website for that. as well. The climate action and equity are now, instead of being kind of standalone chapters of that, are interwoven into all the other sections. That's the big update on the long-range transportation. The Rivanna River pedestrian bridge, we also received an update. Now it's, because of the design that was chosen, it's entirely in the county now, instead of being county and city. And TJPDC applied for a RAISE grant to complete the engineering for the bridge, which we hope will reduce the contingency and make it more feasible for the next round of smart scale applications. Safe Street, we got an update from Safe Streets for All. We were awarded about $850,000. I think we'll probably hear a little bit about that later in the evening. And that will go to complete the comprehensive safety action plan for this region, the goal of which is to prevent roadway deaths and serious injury. The second meeting I had was the Tree Commission, met April 4th. Looking at the downtown mall trees that were cut down, I believe 2 benches have been created and are being tested from the lumber from those trees. And the other thing is we still need to figure out what to do with the tree stumps. We also received a presentation by Mr. James Fries on Module 2. The Codes and Practices Subcommittee of the Tree Commission is going to be reviewing that and submitting its comments. We discussed best practices to measure existing trees for that tree removal permit. I think there might be other ways that would be better to do that people were suggesting. And possibly we discussed that fines from the tree removal permit or people violating that could go into a tree fund. And we learned that Module 3 is going to have some flexibility in the setbacks, for example, and language like that to be able to save some trees that would apply to Module 1. And the last thing I have from the Tree Commission is that the city did its first controlled burn, which is a good thing. I don't think we've had one, or it's been forever since we have, so. That's all for me.
Where did we do a controlled burn?
I actually don't know.
Interesting. Thank you. Ms. Russell?
I unfortunately missed the April 6th TJPDC meeting. I'm looking through the agenda packet, and it looks like there was a report on the Charlottesville Albemarle MPO, sort of like, it's called the Unified Planning Work Program presentation, and it's both a summary of some of the big projects that have been ongoing, like Smart Scale and Bike Ped and regional transit planning, and then potentially a look ahead at the next fiscal year. I don't want to speak out of turn, so I'm not going to try to explain what happened in a meeting I wasn't at. But there is information online, and I'll plan to give a better update next month.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartz?
Attended the BAR meeting last month. The only thing of interest was a proposed hotel at 843 West Main Street, which is one of the empty parking lots next to the Standard. And I guess what's just interesting about it is that it has a 15 to 20 foot setback to try and create a nice outdoor plaza in front, which it'll be interesting to see how that works with our future zoning code, as well as there's going to be a lot of discussion about how the back works. It's currently following the regulations for bulk plane, but it is sitting really high above West Haven. So there's some community feedback about how can it be less of a wall. So that will be interesting to follow. That was just a preliminary discussion, so nothing set in stone yet. At the BPAC meeting, a lot of it was a presentation from our transportation planner, Ben Chambers, so I'm sure we're going to probably get similar stuff tonight. And then I just wanted to disclose that I did meet with 2 representatives of Livable Seaville, just to kind of listen to some of their concerns. That's it for me.
And Mr. Stolzenberg?
Let's see. I had a meeting of the City Manager's Downtown Mall Committee last Thursday. We received a very interesting presentation from Beth Meyer from the Architecture School at UVA about sort of the history of the mall, Lawrence Halpern's vision for the mall, and the 2008 plan to redo the mall, and how some pretty radical changes were proposed and kind of fought back. We kept their brick size. There were some changes to the tree grates that are problematic, and a variety of other issues about cafe space being privatized, predates that, and lack of seating, and other changes from the original vision in the mall we see today. And we'll be discussing more about that and how to remedy those problems over the coming months. I was supposed to be at an MPO Tech meeting that I also missed, so I also can't tell you about the Unified Planning Work Program. I need to catch up on that. But we also, or they also discussed the moving towards 2050 long-range transportation plan, and are starting to talk about Smart Scale Round 6, which will be coming up in, I guess next year will be applications. We scored pretty poorly on our Fifth Street application for a low benefit score. So there's discussion of whether we can rework that project to do better. And of course, the Rivanna River project will be getting that raised grant for preliminary engineering on to hopefully reduce those contingencies.
Can you explain what a low benefit is?
The benefit of the project, according to the scoring criteria, was not high enough. So Smart Scale, you get all these points for the various benefits, and then you divide by the cost. In the end, I guess you could say the cost was too high or the benefit was too low. But we either need to up those benefits, or we can put in local money and reduce that cost to get the overall score higher and get higher ranks in the future.
Thank you. Mr. Palmer, the university, how is it?
Things are good over at the UV. I don't know if you've heard of our rebranding, but so that's my big news of the day. I don't have a whole lot to report, but I did notice that we have several construction projects going on around UVA, which you might have seen. It was just interesting. I saw that the Alderman Library seems to be moving along really well. That's one we don't talk about too much because it doesn't really impact traffic and whatnot. But that'll be done. It should be towards the end of 2023, as well as the Contemplative Commons should be hot on its heels to be done. That's the one on Emmett Street, which includes the pedestrian bridge across the street there, which will be a nice addition to the campus, to grounds. And then finally, the data science is really moving along. They're putting a lot of brick on the building, and that's going to be a new school for UVA. I mean, it exists already, but that'll be a new home for that school, data science. And that should also be done towards the end of 2023, early 24. So, a few projects that are finally starting to come to the final stretch, I'll say. We have others as well that are ongoing, but on their heels.
That's exciting. Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
As for me, with I think she was chair at that time, Planning Commissioner Karen Firehawk at the Albemarle County, we put together a talk about climate action planning in the region as part of a larger University of Virginia event. I didn't send you invitations because it was a very small venue, but it was recorded, and I will share out the recording when it comes out. I think it was productive. I think it's good for us to be talking about regional climate action planning. And hopefully it will lead to good things in the future. At this time, I turn to NDS. Ms. Creasy, can you start us off?
Sure, I'll start off. I remember reading in the paper this morning concerning funding for that invasive species, and so I did clarify with the budget office that council did put that back in the budget. So, because I was like, I saw that this morning. I'm like, wait a second. So while we were in the meeting, we clarified that. So we have a lot of things going on right now, everyone. We have 2 open houses coming up. We have an open house tomorrow evening at Carver from 4 to 7 p.m. If you're able to attend, that'd be wonderful. We also have an open house on Saturday in this room from 10 to 12:30. There's a lot of activity on Saturday going on downtown, and so we're hopeful that some of those events will also encourage folks to come visit us on their way or after they finish those other events. So we've got those opportunities. There are some other opportunities that are occurring with our consultants in town during the couple of days that they're here. So we'll be focused on Module 2 for the most part during that event, but I anticipate we'll get comments and feedback on lots of aspects of it. So definitely anyone in the viewing audience, please check those out. We'd love to have you come to those events, one or the other, or both, totally your choice. They're drop-in with stations for different explanations of what is involved with Module 2. Again, Module 2 is out for review. It's available on our website. And the next part will be forthcoming.
These events are on the website, right?
Correct. There's a link that takes you to the CBO plans, and we've had a couple of press releases. We'll have some reminders going out as the week continues as well. Okay. No worries at all. We have a work session scheduled for April 25th. That is our fourth Tuesday. We are planning to do a review of Module 2, so kind of a presentation like we did before, and then opportunity for discussion on that as well. James, did you have any other things to tag on the presentation?
No, I mean, you covered just about everything. Again, encouraging commissioners to come to one or more of the open houses if you're available, and we'd certainly love to have you all there. And then the other thing is just, as we have fallen a little behind schedule on this, we're going to be reassessing our overall schedule and try and provide to you all and to the public and council and everybody our assessment of where we think this thing's going to land at this point, given where we are now and what additional work needs to happen. So look for that in the near future.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Are we still expecting Module 3 this week?
No, we will not be getting Module 3 this week. That was one of those things that has fallen behind. One of the things, when I look at the schedule, it's going to be when can we anticipate a release date for Module 3 at this point, and looking at the remainder of the schedule going forward.
Cool.
Yeah.
Any additional questions for staff?
Can we just change the website thing, Module 3? It says plan to release the week of.
I understand, and we were hoping to come up with a new date and put that on there.
Yeah.
Rather than just leaving it blank
Say
at this
release
point.
2023.
Well, I mean, that's safe, but broad. Thanks.
Thank you. At this time, I would like to hear from the public on matters not addressed on the agenda, which basically anything except for CDBG and home. You are welcome.
All right, so we're going to handle this the way that we handle this typically. We are going to open up to our in-person audience first to provide comments. Everyone has the opportunity to give 3-minute comment. Then we will move to our virtual audience, where if anyone is interested in our virtual audience and participating, please raise your hand or hit *9. And we will call on folks in order there, and we will alternate between in-person and our virtual audience until everyone has had an opportunity to speak. We do have a public hearing that's scheduled to start at 6, but we are still waiting on quorum, and so we'll see how many speakers we have and kind of work through that. But we'll start with our in-person audience. Mr. Emery is very excited to speak this evening.
Thank you.
Mr. Emery, you want to come to the microphone, please?
prepared comments and prepared just shortly ago, so haven't even had a chance to read through them in time. Now, I know how to walk my dog, and I know how to plant trees. So speaking about Module 2, Division 4.11, outdoor lighting, is way outside of my lane. There are good model lighting ordinances available that we can adapt for our locality. Lighting codes known to work well for decades. There are detailed lighting recommendations from the Illuminating Engineering Society to provide a further guide. There's local expertise and interest from architects, from lighting designers, environmentalists, and others to write a new ordinance that serves our community well. Artificial light at night is an issue, especially for its longer-term impact on our environment, on our health, and it can be ameliorated by good lighting. The draft lighting ordinance, in its gaps and simplicity, turns back the clock to the 1970s. It's a step backwards from the existing lighting code. It is professionally and legislatively naive. It has no basis in the national standards that VDOT follows. The basic principle is simple. Use the right amount of light, only where needed, only when needed. Lighting affects health. Lighting creates serious environmental issues. LED technology has made light cheap to produce and spectrally disastrous. There are good lighting ordinances available that we can use as a guide. This section needs a thoughtful, professional redo. Thank you.
All right, we will move to our virtual audience. Our first person with their hands raised is Genevieve Keller. Ms. Keller, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. You can begin.
Thank you. I'm Genevieve Keller, a city resident. Hello, everyone. I'm a former member of this body, and I appreciate and respect the time and talent that you each bring to your deliberations. And I hope that you will take my comment in the spirit in which it is given tonight. That is to be helpful and to share my thoughts about the recent dialogue around the table. At your last joint work session, I was distracted, disgusted, and concerned that a commissioner made a comment about a hypothetical armed situation regarding the distance of a setback. The comment included a reference to a Maserati driven by a lingerie model. There was another comment that referred to a male body part as a descriptive term. This semester, I'm working with some extraordinary young women in their 20s, who I believe must be reawakening some of my dormant 1970s brand of feminism as they critique writings by men from earlier eras. And I'm heartened by their concern about the way that women's attitudes, work, and roles have been underrepresented, ignored, or dismissed in environmental and planning literature. And at a meeting I attended recently, 2 other colleagues, both formerly associated with the city, found the commissioner comments offensive also. As a person who spent the first half of my career as a community planning consultant, I was accustomed generally to being the only woman in the room. So I've certainly experienced much worse, both verbally and physically, than what happened in City Space 2 weeks ago. However, this was never acceptable, and it certainly is not acceptable among public officials in 21st century Charlottesville. The comment made me even more aware that at that meeting there were 9 men and 1 woman around the table. As the most important land use decision in a century is being made here over the next few months, the major advisory opinion will come from 6 men and 1 woman, and ultimately will be decided by 4 men and 1 woman. These are decisions that will affect women in many ways, and what is most certain is that they will affect the most vulnerable women of all profiles. Young single parents, usually women, single women living alone, often for the first time, and aging or aged women on fixed incomes, and most often, again, women who are living alone. For many women who own their own residence, it is their only or major financial asset, as well as their home. And especially if they are older, they probably were underemployed and underpaid and spent at least some time out of the workforce or working only part-time because they were or are caring for children or other family members. Women, even today, still spend more time in their homes and their neighborhoods because by and large, they are our nest makers and our caregivers, and they are still exploited, stereotyped, and demeaned. Please be empathetic and aware that words do matter and that words reflect attitudes that ultimately affect policy and ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, I will check with our in-person audience. Do we have anyone else in our in-person audience who would like to speak this evening? All right, and I'll turn to our virtual audience. Do we have anyone in our virtual audience? Please raise your hand or hit star 96 if you're interested in speaking. Chair, we have no other speakers at this time.
All right, thank you. I'd like to close public comment at this time, and I turn to the consent agenda.
Sounds like there's no discussion. I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
I hear a motion. Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor? Can I get some thumbs? I see thumbs. Okay. I believe that passes. And 6:01, we are almost on time. At this time, I would like to open a joint public hearing with the Planning Commission and the Charlottesville City Council. Mr. Mayor, is council in order?
We are indeed. All
Outstanding.
5 here.
We win. This is perfect. Welcome all. And I believe Mr. Kafuna starting us off. Welcome, sir.
Good evening, commissioners, mayor, and members of the city council. Tonight, you used to deal with one of our former staff, Erin Attack. Some of you may know her. She accepted a job with the federal government last fall, and today we have somebody in her position, our new grant analyst, who will be presenting to you tonight. Her name is Anthony Wan, so be nice to him. This is his the first time he's appearing before the Planning Commission. Thank you. Anthony.
Good evening, Commissioners, Mr. Mayor. I would like to bring your attention to a resolution in favor of the current one-year annual action plan for the city's CDBG and home plans. We'll go through a little bit of the background before that. I apologize for the multiple versions that you saw. There are currently 2 plans under development. One is the 5-year consolidated plan that is a much larger document. Tonight we're going to be discussing the first-year action plan for that, which guides the programs that are currently being evaluated and are the subject of the funding recommendations we're going to put eventually before council for approval. I was hoping to get away without this. So we have the 2 plans, and we have worked together with the staff of the Thomas Jefferson Planning District Commission in developing the larger 5-year consolidated plan, of which the annual action plan is a part of it. We are evaluating applications for funding for the 2 federal programs administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. In the memo, there are the 2 estimated allocations. We've received initial notification from HUD that we'll be receiving approximately $410,468 for the Community Development Block Grant Program, and a large allocation of $785,286 for the home program, of which the city will receive a share of approximately $98,161 for programs of our choosing. That touches on the larger home consortium, of which TJPDC is the program coordinator, so we can talk about that if you have any questions. The work of the CDBG and Home Task Force is guided by the several documents that the city has set out for its comprehensive planning, and the specific priorities set forth by City Council last September. We can talk about those. Next slide, please. Well, okay, so let me, if we could just go back for just 1 second, I'm sorry. So there are two set-asides in the city guidance for $89,896.51. One for economic development, which we have included in the funding recommendations that you're going to be taking a look at a little bit later. And then another set-aside for the public facilities and improvements. The task force did not believe that we received applications that were directly relevant to that, so we have held that as a set-aside for programs that are currently being researched right now, and at which point the task force will reconvene, discuss how we want to use that money to best maximize the impact for the residents of Charlottesville, and then we'll be coming before you guys once again, and then eventually to council for a recommendation on that. Okay, the next slide, please. So the task force meets annually and is composed of members from a variety of different stakeholder groups, and their work is to evaluate the application for funding from community-based nonprofit organizations that are related to the key goals of the programs. Each application is reviewed by staff, which would be me and Mr. Kafuna, for completeness, thoroughness, and appropriateness to the established goals that we have. And then the task force members then read each of the applications thoroughly and score them on a scale of 1 to 4 on each of the 13 evaluation criteria. You can get a more comprehensive copy of that for you if you'd like to see that. Next slide, please. So in terms of the request for funding you have before you, they were broken down into 4 major categories: CDBG Community Services, CDBG Economic Development, and CDBG Housing Related. And then the 4th category was directly related to our share of the home allocation. We received 7 applications. Majority of them were for CDBG funding, and there was 1 applicant for the home funding, which made that deliberation process relatively easy. Two things emerged quickly in our discussions. One, it was agreed upon by all members of the task force that all of the applications received speak to very important community goals, and if we had the capacity and the power to do so, we would fund them all at 100%. The asks in each category exceeded the amount of money available to us, which made me very glad that I was not on the scoring side and the funding decision side. We met several occasions. We had a very in-depth discussion about each of the applications and how we could best maximize the impact of these very limited dollars. You can see this slide, and I can get this in bigger detail if you'd like, just kind of outlines what the applications were asking for in each of the different areas. If you go to the next slide, please. And again, I can get this for you in bigger detail, but it was basically decided by the task force, and all members were in agreement to fund several of these programs. We have utilized all of the money available to us. The Charlottesville Critical rehab program from AHIP. Members could speak to the important work that they were doing. The Charlottesville Public Housing Association of Residents, the work that they do with their members. The Community Investment Collaborative, we were very interested to talk through their program, and it was decided to fund them as well. Literacy Volunteers of Charlottesville Albemarle, they were funded. The recommendation is before you. And a lot of discussion was made towards the coordinated entry into homelessness systems of care, the Haven and at First and Market Street. One of the things that was important about the work that they were doing is that they have various coordinators intake coordinators to bring people into their programs, and they have a hotline, but the hotline is not currently funded to be available 100% of the time. And so this funding would help them expand the hours to which that's available and the number of people that they can help bring into the coordinated system of care for people with unstable housing currently. And then under the home funding program, Piedmont Housing Alliance has a program for permanent and long-term affordable home ownership opportunities, and they received the full share, Charlottesville's full share as a recommendation, but in almost all cases, they were less than what the ask was for. We have members of the TJPDC here tonight if we wanted to speak about the larger home program that involves City of Charlottesville and 5 surrounding counties, Albemarle, Flavana, Greene, Louisa, and Nelson. That is a very big thing for me that I was able to say that in order, in alphabetical order, on purpose. So with that, I bring your attention back again to the resolution. The nature of why we're here today is because we are currently developing the 5-year plan and the 1-year action plan. As many of you know, the commission will take a look at it tonight and recommend changes or revisions and moving this on to a final recommendation by City Council, at which point, if it is accepted and approved, then it gets submitted to HUD. The deadline for submission of the 5-year and the 1-year plans to HUD is May 15th. And if we are able to submit locally approved plans, then we continue to remain eligible for the next 5 years of our funding through these 2 programs as an entitlement community. With that, I open it to any questions you might have.
Thank you very much. Questions from the panel? Please start with Mr. Mitchell.
No questions. I've served on that task force a couple of times. I think I chaired it once. I appreciate the very detailed work that you do, all the stuff you have to comb through, and I do appreciate how you netted it out. So thanks for making it so net, because it's a lot of stuff.
Mr. Duranzian.
I'll be happy to fill in any thoughts or feelings on how the deliberations went if it's necessary, but I chaired the committee, so I don't really have comments on it, except to say that some of these numbers got to where they were because we were put into a box by the city council's "you shall," not "you may," not "you should," "you shall." So that's why some of the numbers were configured the way they were.
Thank you. Mr. Abab.
Thanks. I had a quick, just the only question I had, and I don't have an issue with it, was the condition on the resolution. And if you can just talk to that and why we're adding that.
So the way flood hunting, and again, I'm very new to this, so I will allow Mr. Kafuna to correct me on any issue. The way HUD funding occurs is that they give an initial estimate of funding for the 2 programs, and then that funding can change at any point based on HUD's decision, either with warning or without warning, both before and after the official funding agreement is completed. And so my understanding is that there's always, sometimes there are several conditions, but there's always a condition that if HUD does come in at some point, like with the final official allocation, and they revise the number down, all of the funding recommendations would be adjusted pro rata, so it would still balance out.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you.
Ms. Russell.
No questions from me, and I do think I should disclose that I'm on the board of AHIP, but I don't think I have a personal interest as defined by city code.
Thank you.
Mr. Schwartz.
No questions.
Mr. Stolzenberg.
Well, welcome, first of
Thank
all.
you. Thank you.
I guess my one question, so, I noted that Habitat wasn't funded because they would probably be applying to other programs like HOPS. Do we know if they did apply to HOPS? Or VCS?
Yes, they did, and yes, they were funded.
Okay.
Yeah. And so just to add on to that, that was probably the longest discussion that the task force members had. And again, that go back to the initial kind of point of agreement, that if we had the capacity, we would fund everything. The decision kind of revolved around the fact that just in terms of the numbers of people that could be impacted, and the fact that they were likely to get funding in other ways, we could allocate our resources for the maximum impact.
Thanks.
Mr. Pulver?
No questions.
Thank you. It appears clear to me. Thank you very much. Mr. Ping?
No questions.
Mr. Pinkston?
No questions. Thanks to the task force for all the work they did.
Ms. Burrier? Mayor Snook?
No questions, thank you.
Mr. Wade? No. I think we're moving into deliberation. Public hearing. Public hearing. I would like to hear from the public at this time, please. Apologies.
All right, same procedure that we did for matters from the public. We will ask our in-person audience if there are any speakers, and we'll start there, and then we'll move to our virtual audience, and we will alternate until everyone has had an opportunity to speak. Everyone will have 3 minutes to speak. If you're in our virtual audience and you're interested in speaking, you can raise your hand in the app, and or you can hit *96, and that will raise your hand in the app. I'm going to ask our in-person audience, do we have any speakers at this time? Okay, no in-person audience speakers at the moment. We do have a virtual speaker. Ms. Conte Morve, sorry. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am. Go ahead and
Okay.
speak.
I just joined recently, so I'm not sure whether I'm allowed to talk about the proposal for an 8-story building at 1709 Jefferson Park Avenue, which is on your agenda. Am I allowed to talk about that?
Apologies. This is the CDBG and home grant section. We already did public comment on items not on the agenda.
Okay, so no, I can't speak then. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, I'll check with our in-person audience. No speakers in person. Do we have any additional virtual speakers? All right, Chair, I don't see any additional speakers at this time.
Thank you all very much. I'd like to close public comment at this time. I was so excited about it. Deliberations. Thoughts on this item?
And this is very good work. Again, I appreciate how you netted out so much information. I certainly am willing to recommend to council that, and I'll explain this, read the resolution, that we endorse the task force's recommendations.
Do I hear a second?
Well, you got to read the resolution.
I have to, oh no.
Or somebody has to.
I'll do it. Resolution. Approval of the 2023-2028 5-year consolidated plan for the Thomas Jefferson Area Home Consortium and the fiscal year 23-24 annual action plan for the city of Charlottesville. I make a motion to recommend approval of the FY 23-24 annual action plan for the city of Charlottesville as recommended by the current CDBG Home Task Force and as outlined in the Planning Commission packet for April 11th, 2023 with the following conditions. 1. The city adjust for actual CDBG entitlement amounts as received from HUD, in which funding allocations will be increased, reduced at the same prorated percentage, actual entitlement, to be estimated, and no agency will increase more than their initial funding request.
So I would then move that we endorse the resolution as read by the chair.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
I hear a second. Ms. Creasy, will you please, deliberations?
So I'm not inclined to second guess the deliberations of the task force. Certainly not going to question the administrative overhead in case Mr. Sanders is here. But I do have some gentle critiques on the process. Just for future years, I guess one would be that it would just be helpful to have the applications themselves posted on the internet somewhere if they're not, or a link to them. Maybe not even necessarily that we need to we're supposed to read them unless we want to, but just for posterity and be able to reference in the future. And another is just that the rubric feels a lot like it's judging the wording of the grant or of the application, the grant writing, rather than the end thing, right? Provides a clear description and clearly explains how it will address one or more council priorities, and then goes to adequately explains. Whereas I feel like it should be clearly addresses or strongly addresses council priorities or adequately addresses council priorities rather than how well it explained it. I think this is the same rubric we've been using for years, but probably never said anything before. And I think that was all I had. Oh, and then in the minutes, I wasn't sure who some of the abbreviation, the initials were. So if we get a roster or whatever. Not that it's important for any of this, but those are just some of my thoughts when reading the agenda.
Thank you very much. Additional deliberations on this item? Ms. Creasy, would you please call the roll?
Sure. Mr. Schwartz?
Yes.
Mr. DeRazio?
Aye.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
Aye.
Mr. Habab?
Aye.
Mr. Mitchell?
Yes.
Ms. Russell?
Yes.
And Mr. Soliates?
Aye. I believe that is passed. I would like to close this public hearing. Thank you all. Everyone on council, you're most welcome to stay, but you are not required to. You may live your own lives. At this time, I would like to turn to 1709 Jefferson Park Avenue preliminary discussion.
Could I suggest that maybe we want to wait until after it, but that we have another open public comment period. I'd hate to exclude members of the public for, process reasons or reading the agenda wrong, because it's confusing. The whole matter's not on the agenda.
Other thoughts on this?
I think that's a good idea.
I'm comfortable with that also.
And I'm assuming we don't have 40 people on there waiting to speak, so.
Ms. Creasy, do we have 40 people on there?
We have 19 participants.
At this time, I would like to hear a public comment on items not on the agenda, which could include 1709 Jefferson Park Avenue. Please.
All right. Mr. Traylor, are you able to? Well, first of all, I'll continue with our current process. Just want to. Do we have anyone in our in-person audience that would like to speak? This is on matters from the public. Okay, not at this time. And Ms. Conte Morva, you are noted here for speaking this time. Can you hear us already?
I can hear you, and thank you very much for letting me speak after all.
Wonderful. All right, you can begin.
Okay, I'm Ellen Contini Morava from 225 Montebello Circle in the Jefferson Park Avenue neighborhood. I'd like to say something about the proposal to build an 8-story building at 1709 Jefferson Park Avenue that you're going to hear a pitch for this evening. This is another example of how developers are scrambling to use the current special use permit process to add height and density to their projects that go beyond what current zoning would allow by right. without having to include any affordable units, which they would have to do if the proposals for inclusionary zoning are implemented. Just like the 5 to 7 story high rise at 2005 Jefferson Park Avenue that you all approved last year. SUPs for extra height, extra density, reduced on-site parking, reduced setbacks, and no affordable units. City planners have been promoting the idea that more density will bring more affordable housing. The inclusionary zoning analysis posted by the Seville Plans Together team last summer mentions extra height, density, and reduced on-site parking as bonuses that are meant to encourage developers to include some affordable housing. But filling the neighborhood up with high rises comes at a cost. Adding to the current traffic and parking congestion, loss of tree canopy, and more broadly, loss of a sense of community for residents in our neighborhood. Why award bonuses to developers without the gain of affordable units that are supposed to be the justification for them? Thank you very much.
And thank you.
All right, I'll check our in-person audience one more time. All right, and in our virtual audience, Ms. King, can you hear me?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So my name is Jennifer King. I live at 221 Montebello Circle, and I'd just like to echo Ellen's comments. I think she very eloquently presented the point, and there's no need for me to represent, but I just wanted to make sure that it was on the record. There was another resident in the JPA neighborhood that shared that perspective.
Thank you very much.
All right, we'll check in-person audience. And I will now turn to our virtual audience. Is there anyone interested in speaking? All right, Chair, it appears we've worked through our speakers for now.
All right, thank you very much. And thanks to all who commented. Mr. Offley, please, take us off.
Planning Commission, City Council, Matt Offley, City Planner, Neighborhood Development Services. Tonight, you're having a very preliminary discussion and receiving a presentation from Mitchell Matthews, representing the owners of Neighborhood Investment LLC, is in the early stages of pursuing a redevelopment of 1709 Jefferson Park Avenue. The site is currently occupied by a 4-story apartment building that has 8 units with approximately 15 surface parking spots. And was constructed in 1972. The applicant is proposing to replace the existing building with an 8-story, approximately 70 feet under our current zoning, residential building that would have 27 units and 23 parking spaces. To accommodate the development as presented, the applicant will need to pursue a special use permit and a critical slope waiver. Prior to moving forward with an application, the developer is requested to present to Planning Commission to hear your initial thoughts and to get any feedback. Within your packet tonight, on the last page, there are 4 different topics that Planning Commission might want to consider after the presentation. But again, this is a very, very preliminary. We have not received an application, so there's nothing been reviewed by staff, not even an application received. So this is, again, very, very early in the application process. Before I hand it over to the applicant for their presentation, I'm happy to answer any just general questions. And if not, I will turn it over to Mitchell Matthews and their team to give a brief presentation.
Questions from the commission on this item? For staff?
The question for the developer, when do they think they're going to want to bring this before the body? Is this going to happen before the fall?
I'll refer to them when they can answer after they give the presentation.
The reason I asked the question is I wonder what zoning ordinance will be in place for they. And you did a good job outlining what's gonna happen, so, yeah. That'll drive a lot of our discussions, like what's in place when they bring it before us.
Please.
I have a question. Normally, your staff reports sort of analyze, I think, and maybe I missed this, the proposal to the future land use map. And I didn't see that, and maybe could you just briefly comment on that?
Yeah, because this is very we don't have an application to review. So what they're asking is, before they even submit an application, they wanted to come before this body
Sure.
to see what they want to do.
But we have their exhibits, it's just not formally an application.
Correct, yeah, staff's not, we'll review it once we have an application, a check.
Mr. Stolzenberg, anything else from the commission?
So what
Yes.
is currently zoned, I'm sorry, currently it's,
Currently, this is R3.
and if the current ordinance goes through, it'll be CX5.
Correct.
Another question I had, this might be too early in the process, it might be for the applicant, was the kind of, the anticipated, like, we still have the FAR, they have to provide some affordable units or a cash in lieu, and what that would be, and what would the equivalent of, if we were looking at the draft zoning, how many affordable units would they have had to provide?
So there's not really enough information to do the one FAR calculation at this point, but it would be 10% over any 10 units above under the draft inclusionary zoning.
There would be 3-ish, rounding up.
Yeah, correct.
Additional questions for staff? Mr. Fowler?
Questions for staff?
Questions from council for staff?
I guess it's still, is it to the point where you haven't seen any information about whether they plan to match the draft inclusionary zoning plan requirements?
So in their presentation, they can speak to that to a little bit more. They're talking about in their very preliminary trying to hit some of that inclusionary zoning, but I think they would still have to use the one FAR. So we're not that far down that road, but they might be able to provide that during their presentation.
That's the other question I have.
Okay. I believe we're ready to hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Matt. Good evening, commissioners, members of the council. My name's Kevin Riddle. I'm with Mitchell Matthews Architects. John Matthews is here too. We're speaking on behalf of the owner. And I'll quickly go through the materials that we submitted to you and just discuss a few things, make a brief presentation. If y'all don't mind, I'm going to dork out and use a laser pointer as well.
Scientific.
Patrick, do you have that presentation? Great. Okay, if we go to the next page. Thanks. So this just summarizes the request for the special use permit. By right, it's an R3 zone, as Matt mentioned, and it's less than 1/3 of an acre. So by right, we can have 7 dwellings on the property, that's it. Division 7 of the zoning ordinance, though, allows for up to an 87 DUA, which is what we're seeking with 27 apartments. Accompanying this, you can request additional height of up to 101 feet. What we're requesting is about 70 feet, give or take, above the average grade. The yard dimensions required by right, you'll see a little bit more about this later, would significantly limit a new building footprint to less than 40% of the total land area. And as it happens, the existing building is already, it's kind of non-conforming. You couldn't build it now by right. So we request yard reductions to support more housing and more apartments on the parcel. Because of the size and grades on the parcel, capacity to park cars here is pretty limited. So we're requesting a reduction of about 40% over what the current zoning requires. We think this is possibly appropriate, though, because this street is not so unlike West Main Street in the corner. There are a lot of services nearby, markets, University of Virginia. There's already a lot of people walking here. And incidence of car use is relatively lower here than it is in many other city neighborhoods. So now, Patrick, if you could just skip ahead to page 5. There's more details about our request in those pages, but I thought we could just return to it if somebody has a question about them. This shows some census data. You already know a lot of what's here. Most of the people who live in the neighborhood are very young. They're grad and undergrad students. They're renters, and they're walking and biking a lot. And the next page, please. So here we are looking at the site outlined in white dashes here along Jefferson Park Avenue. Looks like we're losing a little bit of the image, but that's okay. It's on the west side. It's about 300 yards south of the grounds of UVA. There's a bus stop that's just a couple of doors down. And then within 500 feet of the property are several multifamily buildings that are greater than 40 feet in height. You have 106 Stadium Road. You have the South Range Apartments associated with the Oakhurst Inn. We have, this one's called the Jefferson Commons Apartment Building. That's almost across the street at 1620 JPA. And then kind of further down this aerial, we have a recent project at 1725 JPA. Go to the next slide, please. So here we see a map that's color-coded with the current zoning. This property is R3. It's intended for potential multifamily use. The existing building on site sits rather far away. Right now, it's over 50 feet from Jefferson Park Avenue. Like many of its neighbors to the south, the deep yard here is surrendered to surface parking with very little regard to streetscape or pedestrian comfort and safety. Plantings and paths are sparse. Asphalt and severe exposure are common. Several recent buildings on the corridor, though, suggest a potentially better alternative. One with smaller yards, yes, but with walkways, entries connected directly to the public way, and planting beds in place of parked cars. Among these are the apartment buildings at 1620 JPA. That has a front yard of about 25 feet. 1725, again, it's sort of down here, that has about a 20-foot front yard. And then directly north of the property is 1707 JPA, built about 15 years ago. It also has about a 20-foot front yard. The front facades of the apartments at 1600 JPA up here, the Oakhurst Inn site, those are right on the property boundary in places, practically on it. So the front yard in this property is somewhat negligible, probably ranging somewhere from 2 to 8 feet in size. At 1707 and 1725 JPA, side yards also are less than what is required by right. They are under 10 feet wide. What you would also notice too, if you kind of look at this map slightly expanded, is that the property north, the one built about 15 years ago, as well as the one built just several years ago at 1725, we think they provide a somewhat useful kind of bookend to this property in this neighborhood. If you imagine their front yards kind of extending along the other parcels, we think that makes a slightly better sense, an improved trend here to create a better street wall and to use more of this land to provide more housing. Now, if we look up at the circle, there are currently 2 3.5-story buildings on Montebello Circle. So it has a few buildings with some height to them. There's one at 210, which I believe is this property, and then a little out of view down here is one more at 300 Montebello Circle. Go to the next slide, please. So here's a map color-coded with the city's proposed new zoning classifications. CX5 is what currently is intended for this property and its immediate neighbors. Note that the new zoning is currently drafted would allow an owner to build on more of her property. It would impose no limit to density and potentially no minimums to on-site parking spaces. One correction I should note on this slide, in case y'all noticed it, before the module 2 of the zoning rewrite, the draft was published, we had just had a placeholder that included current zoning requirements for parking. The 1 space for 1 and 2 bedrooms, the 2 spaces for 3 and more. But we understand that potentially that could be significantly reduced, if not eliminated. And the next slide, please. This site just emphasizes some areas of denser construction or housing in the city. The ones in the deep orange are ones that were built by 2011. The ones in the darker purple were built since then. And while we have had one recent project at JPA come along at 1725, and another at 2005 has recently earned approvals, there's so much along this current stretch that is a little bit tired, a little long in the tooth, and it's a place that has potential promise for significantly denser housing, which we think our proposal would align with that vision. And the next slide, please. Here is a Streets That Work slide. I think the current zoning draft agrees with a lot of this, even though this is an older document. And we just see here that JPA is a mixed-use B, intended to be, and that's true too of West Main and the corner. So that the same access to commercial services, to UVA, a lot of walking going on. It's a very wide, bustling avenue. We think it's a place where parking reductions would make sense, in short. And the next slide. So now we've zoomed in on the site. This is a survey. We have Montebello Circle at the top, and down below is Jefferson Park Avenue. We have colored in this sort of light pink. This matches what's on the city's GIS map, indicating critical slopes on the property. And the site indeed is unusually steep. As you go from Montebello, only about 150 feet down to Jefferson Park Avenue, you drop 54 feet. There are a few locations that are not coded as critical, but I think those are not naturally occurring flat areas. Those were just produced when this earlier apartment building was constructed. This is true of a lot of properties along the stretch of JPA. There's at least 8 or 9 south of this one that, if you look at the GIS map, you'll notice they're laced with critical slopes too. And they would really be significantly hindered if some waiver was not allowed. So we are seeking a waiver in this case. And the next slide. Here are some drawings that help you to see what would be allowed under different standards. So we contrast first what's on the left here. We have a plan above that survey shrunk down, and then below we have a cross section cut through the site and looking north toward UVA. And so the sections below go with the plans above. And on the left you see by right use. Basically where you see a white rectangle, that's the area in which somebody could build without seeking any special uses or exceptions. Over on the right is a different vision for the property. This aligns with what we have in Module 1 of the zoning rewrite. So you can see that side yards potentially can be built to, and that the build to range at front yards. This is a double frontage site, so Montebello is a front yard as well as JPA. You can see that range is rather narrow. With bonuses, you can build 100 feet tall with the zoning rewrite. But we have this here mainly just to sort of indicate the vision going forward for the city. It's not that we would be depending on what's currently in the comp plan and the zoning drafts to have a viable project here. What's allowed with a special use permit process can also be achieved, and we show that in the middle here. So we're proposing a 70-foot tall building from the average grade, and we're we're proposing 5-foot minimums along the side, but you'll see in some subsequent plans that most of the building would actually not get that close to the side yards. At JPA, we're proposing 18 feet, and up at Montebello, we're proposing a 25-foot front yard. And the next slide, please. So here are just a couple of floor plans for reference sake to give you some impression of how the building's kind of working with each of its streets. So on the left is the entry level off of Jefferson Park Avenue. And you can see where most of the parking will be. It's under the building. It'll be largely concealed from view. We have as well up here what you see in the lighter brown as opposed to the dark black. Those are just where we're considering having planting beds so that we could have better street trees where there are none now. We, in addition to the entry into the parking area, which we'd like to keep as narrow as possible, we have an entry court here and a lobby for the tenants. Over on the left, we're hoping that we can find space to largely conceal trash bins. The grades here might assist us so that we could actually kind of submerge those and have them behind site walls or retaining walls. On the right is the floor plan about 4 levels up that would, you could enter the building here from Montebello up at the top of the site. We have reduced the surface parking by half of what's there now, but we are still keeping 4 spaces up here. However, to improve the streetscape, we are proposing some planting so that we have a couple of medium-sized trees and understory planting on the right side. We have a covered entry and a walk that leads from a sidewalk that we would also be introducing along with a small seating wall over here. You can see on the side yards what I was talking about a moment ago. Most of the building will be 12 feet from the property boundary. But it's just up here, close to JPA, where we are proposing a kind of entry volume that comes up 2 stories and that gets closer to the street as well as to the north boundary. And we believe this is going to have beneficial effects on the massing of the building so that we can step back the front facade and the corner facades as we go up to the full height of the building on the avenue. And the next slide, please. And if you could scroll this one up just a little bit. This is a section that cuts through the site. A little map at the top, I think, explains it. We're cutting about halfway through the site and the building, and we're looking toward UVA. And we've extended the section out to show you buildings that are on the other side of the street, to give you some impression of what kind of room there is beyond the property. So with JPA, we have an unusually wide right-of-way. It's over 80 feet. And so what would end up, the outcome here would be, with our proposed front yard, we are still over 120 feet from the facade of the 1620 JPA apartment building across the street. There's also a smaller stone house that's south of Valley Road here. That's also about 120 feet away, or would be about 120 feet away from the facade of the proposed building. As we go to Montebello, we have a narrower street, but it's also, the street, while it is narrow, you have very different conditions on either side of it. On the east, on the project side, many buildings are within 25 feet of the right-of-way, sidewalks are missing, and entry points are often below the street grade. But on the west side, which you get a glimpse of here, it's pretty different. The buildings sit much higher above the circle, usually at least 12 feet above the elevation at Montebello. They're also typically about 50 feet away from their property boundary. And you notice something in the section here, you'll see a little more of later. There's a very nice stone wall that runs consistently with a consistent sidewalk there that helps to further define the edge there and kind of perch these properties and retain grades. And there's also a lot of plantings on that side. So there's really kind of a lot of buffers in place on that side of the street currently. And if we go to the next slide, please. So the following slides will give you some photographs looking at the site from different angles. Here you begin to appreciate the grades and existing conditions. You can see quite a tall retaining wall here on the neighboring property that extends to the southeast corner of of our property and wraps around. And then you're left with this unyielding apron of aging concrete that's very steep too, by the way, with no walks. I mean, you can eventually reach a little stair that's tucked around over here, but there's no legible or inviting connection from the street up to the building as it currently is. Trash cans are often out, and there are a full 2 curb cuts, even though it's only a 90-foot wide frontage. We go to the next slide. Here's another view. This is kind of turning, and we're over near where Valley Road intersects JPA. In fact, this is Valley right here. Behind us is the 1620 apartment building, 1620 JPA. You see to the right is the apartment building at 1707 JPA. And in this slide, as well as the last one, you can see the building, while it is 4 stories, it's also, because of its location on the site, well up from JPA. In fact, it's well over 20 feet before you get to the terrace on which this building is constructed. And the next slide. And now here's a glimpse of a residential project possible with the requested special use permit. This creates street frontage that is aligned more closely with 1707 JPA and further to its south 1725 JPA. It allows room for at least 2 large trees, as well as understory plantings, new walks, seat walls, and a concealed trash enclosure. All of this would replace the deteriorating and daunting slab of parking that currently is occupying the entire front yard. And the next slide. Here's the same proposal with some alternative exterior materials. And the next slide. Here's another option for exterior cladding. We're showing these alternatives not so much to have a discussion about them specifically here tonight or look for preferences from any of you. It's more just to demonstrate that we've been trying to consider multiple options and really kind of work through this design, see what the possibilities are. We think it's important to test a variety of materials. And at this point, we want to keep a range of colors and textures in play, as availability and cost of materials are bound to vary. And we just haven't even had the chance yet to narrow down our choices with material samples. But we know if the project were to move forward, that during the entrance review process, we would start zeroing in on these. And the next slide. This is the site almost directly across the street. We have a building currently there with 8 apartments. And the next slide. And this is a masonry building to replace it with 27 apartments. And over to the right, you get a glimpse through the tree of the entry lobby, which we imagine right now would have storefront, would be very visible to the street and from the street into the lobby. And up above, it's pretty obscure, but we have located a study lounge there. So this would also be a heavily glazed space with common use and a lot of visibility to the street. And the next slide. Again, here's the cooler customer with ribbed and corrugated metal siding and a white-gray masonry base. The next slide. The aluminum cladding that's mimicking wood. What we're showing here in the balconies, as it might come up, what we're hopeful of doing if the project were to go ahead is to have operable kind of mesh curtains that could be hung there to create screening and privacy, and also to be opened or closed depending on the time of day and the tenant's preferences. And we think this could be a nice way that the facade would be enlivened and would vary depending on time of day and season and the tenant's preferences. And the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry. Actually, can you go back, Patrick? One more thing. Sorry, I know I'm going on a little long. Up here is a canopy where at the top level we step back. And this is actually a semi-open canopy. I know you can't quite see through to the sky, but right now we're imagining it having a sort of fine framing and closely spaced kind of metal pipes up there and that would allow sunlight to occasionally rake through. And the change of materials, too, we envision no matter what the larger cladding is below, we think will help that upper story, along with the step back, to recede somewhat and not be as prominent. And now we'll go on we'll go to the other side of the property in the next slide. We've swung around, we're up to Montebello Circle. We see the existing conditions at the other front yard. So it's pretty tough over here, and not so much, it's not tough in a good way, you know. A lot of parking, almost completely in the front yard there. A little bridge, a meager bridge that comes over. There used to be a deck out here, but even that's gone now. No sidewalks. There really are no sidewalks on the east side of Montebello Circle right now. And the next slide. Here it is from another vantage. You see conditions that are typical here. On the west side, though, you start to see a little bit of what's going on. You have this continuous sidewalk. You have a site wall. You have the yards that begin to slope up, where the houses are about 50 feet away and are perched up high. Also, you have parallel parking on this side, which you don't on the other. And the next slide. So here's our vision for this side. We go to the next slide. Here's the wood version and the gray and silver version. And then the last slide. And here's the last look in brick and metal. Although we retain half of the existing surface parking, as you can see indicated here, we think this combination of pavers, planting beds, and concrete, scored and textured, would significantly improve the streetscape. We propose a sidewalk and a seat wall along about half of the yard. An entry walk leads to a covered entry point. And the planting beds would be sufficient to support at least 3 medium-sized trees, as well as a lot of understory planting. The fourth story, you can see, steps back rather significantly, about 14 feet from the facades below it. There's a change in material as well. And finally, at the building's corners, we've located living rooms and balconies to better orient common space and therefore also increase visibility to the public realm, to give the tenants a nice view out to the street and people a nice view of the building. And so with that, thanks very much for making time to discuss the project, and we look forward to your questions and observations.
All right, thank you very much. I'd like to hear questions from Planning Commissioner, starting with Mr. Mitchell.
The 3 units, the 3 affordable units, what is your thinking about that, and how are you planning to build those in? Have you given thought to that?
That is a good question, and it's one that we're just beginning to think about. One of the challenges can be with a project like these, since it's probably going to be geared so much to student housing. We kind of continue to wonder. I don't know if any of you have had discussions or have any insights about the potential there might be to have kind of an affordable provision that would be geared toward, young people that might be attending UVA, that are coming from modest or low-income families. If there's a potential to have an affordability provision for a project like this one, that's liable to have this kind of demographic. But we know, whatever happens, that there is going to be an obligation to affordable housing that we will be working out if the project moves along. And we know those discussions, too, are going to involve the city council primarily, too.
I think we all care deeply about the students at UVA that may be in need of some additional subsidies, but we care even more about providing affordable housing for the permanent residents of Charlottesville. So it's something we're going to have to work through. Right. The tree canopy, it looks like we're going to lose some trees. We're not going to net up, based on what I'm seeing. Maybe I'm not seeing correctly, but it looks like we're not netting up.
I don't think we're going to, well, I think we might lose, I think there's just one tree, isn't there, of any size that's on the north of the property, close to the boundary with 1707. Maybe if we could look back at some of the photographs, Patrick, if that's possible.
So, in your survey of 2 4-inch crepe myrtles on the south side, and then there's a 12-inch unknown tree, but it's over the property line. Would that be affected by your grading?
Yeah, that one might be affected by.
And then
the
there's that
drainage.
30-inch deciduous guy. It's a little further away, but up a little bit. Would that be affected?
I guess I'm seeing the 20-inch mulberry. You're talking about something bigger than that.
Oh, I'm looking below that.
Oh, you're looking below. Oh,
The
yeah,
middle.
I don't think that one's close enough that it would be affected. But the one that is up top at what is the northwest corner, the 20-inch mulberry, that one, well, that one actually should be fine. Actually,
Yeah, you're not
let
grading
me
up there,
restate
right?
that, because, yeah, we're going to be potentially having to use retaining walls, and grading significantly will be closer to JPA and about halfway up the site. As we get up closer to Montebello, we're really not proposing to change the grades very much there, all right? So where you're talking, right up there, yeah, actually, all those trees should be fine. Yeah, and
Yeah.
this one certainly will be, yeah.
And then that bottom one is the risky guy.
The 12-inch there. Yeah, that one probably is, that one's far enough down the site that I would suspect its root system would be damaged. So that one would be lost, but I think we have the potential here for 2 new, maybe 3 new large street trees on JPA and 3 medium-sized trees up at Montebello. And because of those locations too, kind of closer to the street and potentially, shading walks, we feel like their location will make them kind of work a little harder to serve the public realm than some of the trees that are kind of further up and buried within the sites,
Just to make your life a little easier, it would be really helpful if you would present a proposal that allows us to break even, or at least maybe net up a little bit in the canopy.
Yeah.
Segueing to the critical slopes. Again, pay attention to that as you're walking through that, and what that's going to do to the greenery, and make certain that you can walk us through what you're going to do to mitigate any loss in greenery in the critical slopes. There is no waterway at the base of these slopes, I don't think.
Well, there is a waterway that's actually rather close by on the other side of JPA. It's within 200 feet.
So that might be affected.
Yeah, that's a fact. In fact, I think that's the thing, along with the excess of 25%, that triggers the critical slope classification.
Okay, got it.
Right.
So it's going to be important when you present that you have a good, strong mitigation plan.
Yes.
And things like nutrient credits, while they're intriguing, they don't help us locally. So any mitigation you can do on site, as opposed to like trying to push the issue to nutrient credits that help the Chesapeake Bay would
Yes.
be of great value.
And so, Commissioner Mitchell, when making these kind of proposals, it sounds like maybe you'd like to see at least a kind of an outline or intentions, even though I assume with like the site plan review, then a lot more of the details are going to be hammered out with that.
That is certainly what Mr. Freeze is trying to point us to, but I still like to be comfortable
Yes.
that there's a good, strong mitigation plan to protect the waterways and to at least net zero on the tree canopy.
Right. Okay.
Mr. Duranzia.
Actually, Commissioner Mitchell stepped into the affordable housing piece with pretty much my question, so.
Mr. Above.
Sure. I guess I'll start. These are kind of questions and comments. I'm having a hard time separating them.
Yeah.
Similar to Commissioner Mitchell, I like the trees on the street. I think it's better than what's there now. More if you can fit them all around the site to break even at least if we can.
Right.
The current site is kind of unfriendly with a lot of pavement, so I think this is a good approach that nestles that grade change from JPA to Montebello, and definitely does a better job of presenting itself on Montebello than the current structure.
Yeah.
I appreciate the eyes on the street approach. My concerns are, other than the earlier stated, the other one being the rent, also taking into account the existing units. They're kind of in this old, not very nice looking building,
Yeah.
versus you're probably gonna, I'm just guessing, it's gonna be a higher end potentially rent and just trying to preserve some of that if we can. Affordability, whether for students or if it finds its way into our larger Charlottesville affordable housing funding.
Right.
The other concern was how much space was between this building and the building next door. There are units that are there with windows facing. I
Right.
don't know.
Yeah, I believe, you're talking about with 1707 is to
Mhm.
the north.
I think
Yeah.
you both probably have windows facing each other.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that building is 10 feet or so off of its side yard.
Okay.
So it is a somewhat narrow space, but we realize too, just for code purposes, as you're aware, that when we're, so close to the property boundary, there are gonna be limitations on openings, and they might have to be protected if we go above that. We still feel though, if we have at least, 15 feet or so, between, this facade and the other one, that it's, that it's not necessarily gonna be too close for comfort, but I think now we would have over 20 feet.
Okay.
Based on this proposal and what's there now.
And along that same location, I don't know if it's even possible, but more plantings and or a way for the public to navigate between the upper gathering space and the lower gathering space.
Right.
Just to kind of encourage public circulation through. And materiality-wise, I know we're not really talking about that much now, but definitely brick on JPA's side would be my preference.
Right.
And then I had questions on the material at the balcony. You mentioned it a little bit. I missed what you said on the balconies.
Where we have that kind of exterior drapery there, that would be a kind of a metal mesh curtain, so it would be, durable, but also potentially operable. It's just a kind of a potential addition. Some of us think it could be nice because it would allow for potentially, more privacy for tenants, but also create the potential for a kind of shifting facade depending on how people are using those, whether they're throwing them wide open or closing them partially, depending on the time of day.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Ms. Russell?
Thank you. I was hoping you could help me understand how I'm reading the height and the floors and the stories, and then looking at the proposed future zoning. So you are proposing an 8-story building at 70 feet. In this future rezoning, that's proposed to be a CX5, which is max 5 floors, height 72 feet. What am I missing in that? What am I getting wrong here?
Right. I don't think you're getting anything wrong. That is true of the CX5. I think at a bonus level, you can have 100 feet and 7 stories.
Correct, yeah.
But we're seeking a special use permit based on the current zoning. So with the current zoning, there is not a limitation on stories. There's a limitation on height at 101 feet. Potentially you can consider up to 101 feet in height from the average grade. So we're proposing about 70 feet from the average grade. And also the reading of the stories of the building, I think, can be a little bit tricky in that, again, it is a property that has 2 front yards. So I think in a way, it's equally valid to say, yes, it's an 8-story building on JPA, but on Montebello, it's a 4-story building. Because the grades just inevitably create that change as you go from one side to the other.
Okay, okay. Average grade, meaning middle. Got it.
Yeah, I think on that section, Commissioner Russell, I think I have that dashed in. It's
Okay.
kind of rough at this point. It's normally something we would later on have to calculate pretty specifically along with a team of civil engineers to make sure we got it just right. So ultimately, say, if this proposal were to be built, it could be the roof's maybe 72 feet from the average grade or 68 feet, but we think it's going to be about 70 based on what we've drawn here.
And there's a step back at Monticello on that 4th.
But you're not sure how.
Yes, there is. Yeah, and you can see in the section there. So at JPA, we have a couple of step backs. They're modest, but they're not insignificant. There's the entry volume I mentioned at the base of the building at JPA. We step back about 7 feet to the floors above. And then the top story, we step back about another 5 feet, as well as change materials. On the Montebello side, we go up 3 stories and then step back about 14 feet, as well as change materials. So our impression is that on the Montebello side, it's creating an impression not unlike a 3.5-story building if this had a pitched roof. You know what I mean? And there are already a couple of buildings that height on Montebello on this side. So we don't think that this is getting out of neighborhood scale for Montebello as it's designed.
Do you have anything else, Ms. Russell?
I guess maybe I'm just trying to understand if, I guess we don't know potentially if you're asking for more than is in the bonus scenario in a CX5 world, because we don't quite know where that height sort of thing is going to come in. But it would be more than 7 stories, so maybe I've answered my own question. It's more. I don't have any more questions. I have concerns over the lack of or absence of affordability.
Right. Yeah, and we don't mean to suggest that we weren't planning on there being that obligation. It's just not something we've had a chance yet to really kind of consider and include in the presentation. And that's not to say it's an afterthought. It's just we started by trying to figure out, what is the potential for a building here to provide just more housing in general.
Sure.
And realizing then that an affordability obligation would come along with this request.
And my concern is pertinent to our public comment. Ellen, I think was her first name. It's sort of the thing we talked about. Density for density's sake is what we want to avoid, and
Right.
the impact on our community. That it be linked to this thing that we all want, which is affordability.
Yeah.
When we have those concessions for something that's a special use permit.
Mm-hmm.
No more questions or comments from me.
Thank you. Mr. Schwartz?
I don't have any questions. I do just have a couple comments. I think I'm going to be paying a lot of attention to how you deal with the streetscape. What you currently propose has me a little bit worried, because it's 2/3 parking garage and trash cans, and 1/3 lobby, which I know you're on a really constrained site, so there's not a whole lot you can do, and so I guess just obviously whatever you can do when you do develop this for an SUP would be appreciated. And just my general comment is as far as the massing and the height and whatnot, I realize you're not quite meeting what we're trying to get with the new code, but and again, I guess we're not really sure what we're not totally sure yet on that new code. But it's it's JPA. It's this does show what happens when we've got a steep slope. And one of the reasons that personally I feel like height is appropriate on JPA, at least on this side, because the impact uphill to the neighborhood there is far less than downhill, so the impact is on the students basically. That's where the height's going to be. It's where more of the students are, and I don't necessarily think that's a problem. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm pretty supportive of the massing that you're trying to show.
Do you want to do anything with that?
I'm sorry?
Do you want to do anything with that? You don't have to.
No, I don't think I will, except to say thanks. Yeah.
Mr. Stolzenberg?
Thanks. Sorry, I may have missed stuff, but where did we land on affordable units? I thought I remembered in the presentation or in the packet somewhere that it said you guys were gonna do the existing 3412, 5% of floor area over 1 FAR. Did we land on 3 instead?
In the early parts of the presentation and in the narrative there, maybe there was some language there that we had put into the booklet, but you know, we've been reevaluating that in light of what we see as the vision based on the comp plan and the zoning drafts. So, yeah, if there's something there that looks like it's you know, talking about affordability as it was written in the zoning, you know, a year ago or so, we realize there's still kind of more discussion and debate around that.
Okay, yeah. Actually, I guess I'm now realizing it was in Mr. Alfley's staff report, so maybe it wasn't. Maybe you guys just didn't talk about it at all. I think I would agree with everybody that, complying with the new thing generally. And I think we've had vague discussions about like a student affordability program, and it seems like we've mostly landed on the idea of enforcing that would be an absolute nightmare.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, something like this seems like why you have an in lieu payment, because otherwise you're sticking in a bunch of people with a bunch of kids and a bunch of units designed for a bunch of roommates, which I think would be fine here, assuming we keep that in the draft. I guess the question is, why are you guys applying, or why are you here now instead of waiting?
For the new zoning. I think it's just, you know, the owner's feeling that it still feels maybe a little uncertain. And he'd like to move at a clip, you know, at some pace to get this underway. And I guess, you know, I don't know. I mean, maybe you guys can tell us more, but we were thinking that between really hammering it out and then potentially there might be some legal challenges, you know, would the zoning really be in place, say, is it a year from now? Is it 2 years from now? So we're not meaning to kind of jump the gun. I kind of understand why you're asking that. We've had the same discussion, like, are these requests going to be effectively obsolete soon? But we figured we would go forward now, just because there are provisions with a special use permit that can allow this building, and we think it's pretty close to what is outlined in the new zoning draft anyway. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think with the special use permit, you can do basically the same as the new zoning, probably. I think, I think Mr. Schwartz made some comments on Module 1 about how, like, this, with the ridge around JPA here, it makes sense to spread CX8 more. And I guess we'll talk about Module 1 more later. And I think this is a site that makes that clear. So I do want to talk about the couple ways that it seems that you're not super compliant with the existing zoning or the new zoning. One is the front setback, where we are going to institute this this build to line of up to 10 feet, right? So what's the logic behind setting it back more?
Well, there are a couple of things that work there. I guess we were thinking first, for the sake of planting the street trees. We're not aware that the city has enough ground at the sidewalk with the parallel parking there that's common there to plant trees of any significance. And we thought it would just make for a better entry experience to have a little plaza out there, a place to kind of take a load off where you're not necessarily inside the building. Maybe meet up with friends who are coming down JPA on their way to classes. It just felt like a more comfortable distance, considering the building, you know, while not super tall, I mean, it does have some height to it, you know, and it is coming closer to JPA than the existing building. And it also seemed to make a certain amount of sense for it to be somewhat close in its yard depth to what is on the neighboring property at 1707. That feels like a somewhat comfortable yard for a building that's, you know, more than 3 stories tall. And so that's where we landed on that.
Yep. I mean, that's pretty logical. Gives me some stuff to think about when we think about the new zoning.
Yeah.
And I mean, I guess with the greenscape requirement, you would be required to have a planting strip, and then the sidewalk would kind of zigzag in around it.
You probably have,
maybe.
you have a kind of an outdoor
Then we-
space requirement too, that would presumably have to get carved out. It could maybe happen at Montebello, but maybe it could happen at part of JPA if you're saying that you're intrigued by the possibility maybe of some of the building maybe getting closer to the street. I don't know if that's something that we're going to be able to really weigh, but it would be interesting to know if that had any appeal.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't want to lose all the street trees, and you're right, the right-of-way is kind of constrained there. I don't know. I'd have to think about it.
Yeah.
And then I think I also agree with Commissioner Schwartz's comment about the kind of the front and how it's just kind of this gaping maw of a parking garage that looks like it's going to eat you.
Right.
And obviously you need to have the driveway, and I think there is an exemption in the code to the build to requirement, or the active space requirement if you need it for access. But I mean, I guess it doesn't really work with the layout. If you could like move the entrance to a side instead of in the center, that would feel good. Or maybe like the treatment of your second floor kind of looks like the garage is extending upward, and maybe you could, I don't know, I'm not an architect.
Yeah,
You don't want my aesthetic
no,
opinions.
we did look at that. That's a very good observation. We thought the same thing. It would be better if we could have more lobby, more building that's there close to the street, and putting the drive on one side would really help with that. The tricky thing, though, is if you look at the floor plan,
you'd lose four spots.
Yeah, it ends up taking a lot of spaces away. We're already kind of at a small number here. I don't think the owner's going to have in his program a building with no parking whatsoever. And so this seemed like it was a decent compromise. You know, we could have planting on either side of the drive. We could look to a material that's better than just asphalt to get there. Maybe some nice paving, especially maybe aligned with the sidewalk, could go a certain ways.
Mhm.
Another thing to think about too is, maybe Patrick, if you're able to go to the slide that has the picture, one of the pictures of the front, maybe slide, let's see here, 17? Yeah. So, look at 1707 there to the right, or the property that exists to the north. It's got the same kind of entry right in the middle. And you can see what those sycamore trees have helped to do in just 15 years since it was built. You know, it's just lost in shadow for much of the day. So that's something to consider.
Yeah, I mean, that helps across the street, but not if you're on the sidewalk right there, right?
Yeah, yeah. Although it's funny, like if you walk by it and check it out, it's not that. It doesn't sort of grab you as you walk by it, and they don't have a garage door there, I don't believe. So you just see right into the parking level. But I do hear you. It would be nice if there was a way to make that drive less prominent there without, you know, losing 20% of the spaces that are down there too. Because then at that point, it's just, there's so much excavating that the owner's doing and relatively small amount of parking. It might start to get a little perverse.
Yeah.
But we have actually talked in the office, just today we talked about like, well, that entry, that drive, you know, we are extending the reading of the opening up in the masonry, thinking that the vertical proportions have a certain appeal, but maybe we could revisit that, reconsider it, and maybe it would help to diminish that parking entry somewhat. That's worth a look.
Yeah, I don't know. That's more of an entrance Carter question, which we'll get to eventually.
Yeah, right.
But I think you're on the right track with like how to make the driveway just more pleasant to pedestrians. I wonder if you could do something like, you know, in some places you see a level sidewalk rather than a curb cut. I don't know if our SADM even allows this, but like that way you don't have this cross slope that pedestrians have to walk across.
So it's almost like you're going like raised walks you would find maybe in the Netherlands, so that you're not sort of having to bump down and up, and it slows cars down too.
Yeah. I mean, I think that would be great. If I have no idea if we allow that. Probably not.
No special use permit for that.
I think that's all I got. Wait, which one of the three facades is your favorite?
Well, you're putting me on the spot. If I had to say, and I'm going to defend it because I figure most people don't care for it, I kind of like the cool customer. I like that silver fox. But I think the owner agrees with Commissioner Habab and likes the red brick, as I suspect maybe a lot of other people do too.
Could use some cornices. All right,
Like
I'm
the
done.
cornice at
Thanks.
the building
Mr.
at
Palmer,
McIntyre and
I've-
Preston. that
I've
one.
been trawling Charlottesville GIS, and I see something called the University of Virginia on Montebello across the street. Do you have any questions on this one?
Yeah, I mean, we're a neighbor. Yeah, Montebello House, where the dean of the School of Engineering lives traditionally, is there. It's very old and historic structure. Couple things come to mind. It seems like we've gone from questions to comments, but a lot of what I had thought about has been covered. Commissioner Mitchell comments on the critical slope, I thought, make a lot of sense in terms of stormwater. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
the site is probably not holding back any stormwater at this point. But it's good as we have these discussions to really have a strategy and understanding how you're gonna improve that.
Yeah.
And you know, you're early on and you don't have it all figured out. But I think that's important, and we talked about that with 2005 JPA too, I think, when we discussed that one. Let's see, I did have Commissioner Russell same misunderstanding of the height, you know, from JPA. It's really kind of a 95-foot building versus
From the sidewalk,
70-foot
yeah,
building,
yeah,
and-
right.
And that was, you know, just because of the zoning code and how it's applied, I was a little confused there. Because when you were talking about it being a 50-foot drop from top to bottom, I was thinking 70 feet. Why is it 40 feet off of Montebello Circle?
Right.
But it all makes sense now.
Yeah.
So appreciate that explanation. I think Commissioner Haba, what you said about like kind of and Commissioner Schwartz about the streetscape and stuff on JPA makes a lot of sense. I mean, for me, from thinking about students, obviously the safety coming out of that side of the building is like really important. Cars coming out of that garage, that there's good, that wherever it ends up, that it be, you know, visible and easy for a pedestrian to kind of get warning that a car is coming. I also want to make sure that there's room. It seems like you're giving room to the street trees, so that's great. But that, you know, future things the city might want to do to conform with, to bring it up to more of the type B proposed streetscape is really, would be a good, you know, thing to look at, and just make sure your landscape plan is kind of matching that. And on the Montebello side, I mean, that's really a neighborhood. You're right, it's a weird, you know, how often do you have two primary frontages, but here's one. And I think, you know, setting it back makes sense there, especially for the neighbors, as we heard from some of them. It seems like that would be appreciated, and providing a good, you know, formal kind of entry and streetscape there as well. Beyond that, I guess one thing that came to mind, you know, talking about affordability, I know we all kind of snicker a little bit when we think about affordability for students, or think that, you know, it's misplaced in some ways, and you know, I get it. Having lived on JPA in the past as a student, you know, I think a lot of the people that, or in the past anyway, the choice to live there had a lot to do with price. And here we have, you know, 8 units that will not be any longer affordable to a student. I'm assuming these would probably be a little bit more expensive. So just, you know, however we end up dealing with the affordability, I think it's good to recognize just conceptually that there are affordable student units that will be going away with this and not coming back necessarily. But beyond that, I mean, it's well located for students. I'll give you that. So, and I look forward to continuing to see the evolution of the project. Thanks.
As for me, I'm very excited about this site. I've had my eye on it for many years. Sort of, we could do better. I think we can do better than current conditions. So I'm excited to see that. Some permeability, some trees, I think would be a good thing and welcome. Got sort of a mishmash of concerns. Because there are 2 front doors to this property,
Yeah.
That creates an opportunity, which maybe is not exciting, but we could, or you could do vehicular circulation on one side and not the other. So have one curb cut and on one side, and the other side have a really high-quality pedestrian frontage.
Right.
Personally, I would prefer to see that on JPA to really do it right. I understand there are major cost and amenity trade-offs to there, but there are benefits too.
Mm-hmm.
Something to think about.
Okay.
In terms of design, verticality, I mean, I love verticality in design always. It's beautiful. But we have heard and we will hear concerns from the public about height.
Yes.
And that's verticality. So please consider that in the design. Personally, I'm happy to see modern materials. I'm happy to see ideas of shifting and adjusting to the needs of the occupants. That seems reasonable to me.
Right.
Affordability, I agree, a concern.
Mm-hmm.
I think those are my main things. Mr. Payne?
The others already asked, but I mean, do you have any specifics on what you're thinking in terms of affordability?
No, we don't right now.
Mm-hmm. And then just to clarify, there's 8 units on site, and this was 21 or 24 units?
27.
27?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, just general comments. I mean, I think to make such heavy reference to the future land use map and comprehensive plan and zoning and to not match the draft inclusionary zoning program is not appropriate or acceptable for this or any projects. And would agree with the comments Commissioner Mitchell said earlier, as well as it's just an interesting calculus to think through 8 affordable units being permanently destroyed for 27 new units at a luxury price point. Changes if there's affordability requirement, but interesting. But that's all my thoughts.
They're renting for $850 a bed. I don't know what I'd go.
Yeah, I
so
don't
far
think
as
it's quite that
affordable.
stark a contrast, or would be, but.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That's my round, but we've still got some sort of formal questions that we were asked to consider. Those being concerns related to proposed density, concerns about height and massing, reasonable conditions to consider, and SUP and critical slope waivers. I know we've already addressed quite a bit of that in our comments. Any additional comments on those items?
So on critical slopes, I feel like this is an interesting case where we often think of critical slopes as like, like sort of heavily wooded slopes that are like, undisturbed kind of things. And what we really want out of it is, protection of waterways and protection of natural features. And there are no natural features really on this site, except for the 2 tiny crepe myrtles and the neighboring tree that might get taken out. But, there's that waterway nearby. But it strikes me that you could pave over some flat sites near this and, buy nutrient credits and never get a waiver, which isn't really accomplishing that goal of waterway protection that we want. And of course, because it's a slope, you have to worry about erosion stuff, but it sounds like that is what the state requirements cover. So I guess all that's to say, I'm assuming you'll have a good erosion plan. It would be great to have as much treatment as you can fit. But I'll be interested in whatever stream buffer stuff we come up with once we're done with this zoning code, because I think we can get to those things more directly.
Additional comments on the questions we've been given?
Sorry.
I have a question that's more about our inclusionary zoning, and if we say it's going to be hard to track student affordability, it sounds like though we're requiring the inclusionary zoning no matter what, so we're going to have to figure that out, presumably. Sorry, that's a question I'm looking right at James. I don't know. I mean, clearly it's just bringing up a thing we need to look into.
Please.
Random thing that may impact the neighbors. Have you guys considered how you're gonna, I'm assuming there's gonna be a lot of rock you're gonna have to get rid of.
That's a question. We haven't done any geotech borings yet,
Okay.
so we could be in for some bad surprises, but we don't know.
I guess when, that might be something you could offer as part of the SUP is some conditions that you put on yourselves to not, last for a whole year or something.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of nearby property, and, historic Montebello across the street, yeah.
And we put a bunch of rules on blasting a few years ago, right?
Mhm.
Is that discretionary, that permit now? Like council has to allow it? I mean, I don't know if you'd be, I don't know when you blast. but- Yeah, I get it, yeah. I have a question. What is this building made out of? Is it stick over concrete podium? Or is it too tall for that?
That's what we're assuming at the moment, yeah. It might be getting tall enough, though, that we would go to a metal framing. But that's something else we'll be working out. And especially if there's a masonry facade that's going up that tall, I think we probably would have to go to a metal framing, actually, in this case, yeah.
Can you do 6 stories of wood? Or would there be 3 stories of?
No, I think what you can do is you can do like 5 stories over the podium, I think. But then masonry often has some limitations as to how high you can go before you need a more reinforcing than a stick frame will provide.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Actually, I've got some questions about construction too. There's a Medium post I like very much called "In Praise of Dumb Boxes." I'm convinced. I believe in dumb boxes.
Yeah.
And the concern is basically that if you chop up a building too many times, you lose building. You increase cost and you lose habitable space, which I think the math checks out on that. I see a lot of modulation and a lot of step backs in this proposal. Can you speak to those trade-offs?
Well, that is a good point. I mean, actually, a building that I'm very fond of is right over here, the old Norcross Station building that's parallel to the tracks. And I always think that building's kind of interesting because it doesn't do really any of those things we often talk about, like a modulated facade, stepping in and out and, breaking up monotony. And yet it's a pretty terrific building. Now, it's not as tall as this one, it's more of a long horizontal building of several stories. But it just relies on a simple brick facade and some nice old, steel windows. And it's pretty great like that, without a lot of fussing. In this case, though, as we were just designing the building, yes, we did initially, we had a building that came up about as tall as it is, with a bit of a step back at the top, but not at the base. And then when we started to look at introducing the entry volume that we have at the first 2 stories that encloses the entry to the parking and the lobby, it kind of felt at home on the project. It gave it this sort of, kind of forebuilding that introduces the architecture to JPA, so to speak. And it just looked proportionally better to us. I guess it would be my answer.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Also, other dumb boxes that are this tall, Wells Fargo building, Monticello Hotel.
Yeah,
Of course,
right.
they have cornices. So.
Right. Well, actually, I love the example too of the Carter Gilmer house over here, like 3-story federal house. You hardly even notice it's got a pitched roof because it's up there 3 stories. The cornice is pretty discreet in a way, reserved, and I mean that's a great box there.
All right, last question, I promise. Would you, correct me if I'm wrong, R3 is limited to 87 DUA, which is the 27 units. Would you be splitting this up into more units if you didn't have that density restriction, like in the new code?
Certainly, that's something that we might consider. As we have it designed now, without going up another story or several stories, it would be difficult for us to have more apartments than we're currently showing. I mean, we looked at this a lot of ways with independent buildings, bridging between them, and sort of courtyard space. But we ended up coming back to what we have here, really kind of a dumb box with some variations, because it does provide more housing. It's a site that is confined enough that you're
you can array all of the tenants with views out. You know, it's almost like it doesn't really want a courtyard building unless it was just a much smaller scale project. And so we arrived at this as seeming to work well with the owner's program and to provide something pretty dense here at we think, an appropriate height considering the corridor. Yeah.
Additional questions or comments on this item? Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, everyone.
How are we feeling? Okay, let's go. I would like to talk about transportation. Mr. Chambers, can you take us there?
I think we're getting set up with the PowerPoint here. I'm here to give you a transportation planning update this evening. I know that's probably a novel concept. We could probably also go all night on that concept. I'm going to try to keep us focused to about 4 topics. If you have questions outside of those 4 topics, I'm happy to come back at a later date or answer those questions offline. But we'll try to stick to these 4 topics and not to get too sprawling with it. The first topic, which you can go to the next slide, is just an introduction. My name is Ben Chambers. I'm the Transportation Planning Manager for the city. I rejoined the city in November last year. It says November 2023. That's a boo-boo. It was last year. I'm not from the future. It says I've rejoined the city because I previously worked for the city. I was with the school bus department until 2012. I worked in the front office there. And while I was there, I got the spark to become a planner with NDS. We were working on a sidewalk prioritization back in 2010, and I realized I should not be in bus operations anymore. I should go be a planner. So grad school and several years in the private sector. Since then, I have ended up back here just as I always hoped. So what did I find when I came back? What state was our transportation planning in? Next slide. Yeah, you're all wincing because you know, but I wanted to look at it from sort of the academic sense. In academic world of planning, they talk about the 3 C's of planning to make sure you know it's good planning. You do all 3 C's. It's got to be comprehensive, it's got to be continuous, and it's got to be collaborative. So in terms of comprehensive, we've had some issues. A lot of our planning activities are happening in silos across the city. Some of it's happening in NDS, some of it's happening in Public Works, some of it's happening at CAT, some of it's happening at TJPDC. Our master plan our comprehensive plan identifies a transportation master plan, but it's actually several different plans. It's, you know, our bike ped master plan, it's the streets that work plan, it's a bunch of small area plans. So they're kind of spread all over the place. That leads us to an issue with the continuity of it. A lot of those plans are older. We have our 2015 bike ped master plan. We have our 2016 streets that work plan. We have a bunch of small area plans that were completed prior to the pandemic. So we're working with old plans. We're also working with old data from those plans. So we have a bunch of data that we're relying on that's pre-pandemic, that's informing our projects right now that, you know, probably isn't as relevant as it was 5 years ago. We also have a continuity issue between the plans in that they don't always agree with each other. Even plans that were done in the same year don't agree with each other. So we have to figure out how to put all of those back on the same page and make sure we're headed in the same direction. And lastly, collaboration's been an issue, partly because of the silos, partly because of the different plans being planned separately, partly because we have had challenges with effective engagement. Both prior to the pandemic and because of the pandemic, it's become even more challenging. So now we're trying to get our feet back under us and remember, what was it that we did before the pandemic that was working right? So how are we tackling these 3 big issues that we're facing? Next slide. We're doing a lot of different things. We're doing a lot of work with CAT. We're doing a lot of work with the region. We're doing work with the schools. We're being comprehensive in our scope. We're being collaborative across departments, and we're trying to make everything continuous at the same time. It's a bit of a challenge. We could talk through all of these and it would take us probably several days, but next slide. We're going to stick to these three. This will be the Safe Streets and Roads for All Action Plan, the Non-Motorized Infrastructure Prioritization Process, and the Dockless Permit Regulations Revisit. I'm going to start with the Dockless Permit Regulations Revisit. If you can go to the next slide. So you all probably are familiar with this as the scooters. So the scooters first came to town in 2019 as part of a pilot program, which resulted in us adopting regulations for a dockless mobility permit program. Veo has had, that's our scooter operator in town, the vendor in town. They've had that permit since 2020, since it first became available. There were 2 other vendors that previously held the permit along with Veo. They no longer do. Veo is the only game in town. This permit is managed by the Bike Ped Coordinator, and some of you may be wondering, what Bike Ped Coordinator? You are correct. It is not currently managed by the Bike Ped Coordinator because we don't have one. We have been interviewing one, and we have an offer out to a candidate right now. So hopefully we will have a Bike Ped Coordinator very shortly who will take over this permit program. So when I was hired, though, in November of 2022, Veo came to the city and said, hey, it's been a while since we had somebody to talk to. Can we talk about the regulations? They don't really work for us very well. And I said, well, we've had some issues from our end, too, that we've heard from the public that they're not quite happy with how y'all have been performing. So maybe we do need to look at these regulations. So if you go to the next slide. This is actually telling you how they've been performing over the past year and why it was important for us to sit down with Veo and hash this out. These are a lot of rides. We have about a 250,000 rides a year at this point. A lot of the traffic that we see is between UVA and downtown along West Main Street. We also see some areas along JPA and up like Preston Grady, Rugby Grady area. But the majority of our traffic is between UVA and downtown along West Main. You can see from the graph at the top that it is fairly seasonal. People like riding scooters when it's warm out. It's also very dependent on student population. That's where a lot of our riders are coming from, is students who don't have vehicles. So you see a lot of students riding those scooters and e-bikes during the fall months and the spring months, but not so much during the middle of the winter and not so much during the middle of the summer. Next slide, please. So here are the issues that we both came to the table with. On Veo's side, their biggest concern was our fees. That's not surprising. They're a for-profit company. They're looking for more profit. And so I said, you know, that's going to be a hard sell. We put this in place for a reason. We have these regulations and these fees for a reason. And they said, y'all are charging us way more than anybody else does, like 3 times more than anybody else does. So it's getting to the point where we can't really even make much of a profit here. And, you know, we might just pull out if we can't deal with this. The other issue that they had was the fleet flexibility. Currently, previously the way that the dockless permit regulations were written, they were kind of Byzantine on how many scooters Veo could put on the streets. It started with, you get 350 scooters max. That doesn't include e-bikes. You can do as much as you want with e-bikes. But if you do e-bikes, you get 25 more scooters. And if you do this, you get 25 more scooters. And it became this really difficult thing for us to manage on our side to make sure that they were putting the right number of scooters out and that they were complying with the different, you know, potential elements that they could be adding to the fleet with. And it became annoying on their side because they want to put a certain mix that attracts their customers. And if we're saying, no, it's only scooters and it's only e-bikes and this, you know, if we're being, you know, dictating those little nuances, it becomes hard for them to do business. It becomes annoying for us as well. On our side, our biggest concern was parking, obviously. We have misplaced scooters throughout the city. It's causing safety concerns, it's causing ADA concerns. We were having issues with our sidewalks being blocked, with roadways being blocked, bike lanes being blocked. This has been an ongoing thing that we're hearing from the public. We're also hearing from the public that there are safety concerns with how people are riding the scooters, not just, riding on the sidewalk, but, weaving in and out of traffic, not paying attention to stop signs and stoplights. So we have some outreach that needs to happen to the users as well to make sure that they are operating them correctly. Equity is a concern. These trips are not cheap. There's a fee for unlocking the scooter, and then there's a permanent fee for riding the scooter, and it adds up pretty quickly. This may not be the best resource for a low-income resident as it's currently set up. And lastly, outreach. We have outreach in our regulations that they are supposed to be doing to low-income residents and to student populations to promote safe usage, to promote better parking, to educate users on how they're supposed to be operating these vehicles. And partly because of the way the pandemic has made things difficult with outreach, they have not been able to do it, but they also haven't just been getting out there when they can. So we're going to dive into each of these issues and how we resolve them. If you can go to the next slide, please. All right, so this is just a high-level summary of how we are resolving each of these issues. The high fees, we said, okay, we will take away the per vehicle fee that we charge at the beginning of the year, because usually we say, pay us for the number of vehicles you're going to put on the street on January 1. And then they have to come back to us later in the year and say, well, we want to put 25 more on. So instead of having that back and forth, remove the per vehicle fee. That seemed to be the easiest piece to cut so that they could bring down their cost to revenue. For the fleet flexibility, we wanted to take out the Byzantine rules, just make it a higher max cap, but also include the e-bikes because a lot of their fleet is switching over to being e-bikes instead of scooters. For parking, we are looking at piloting parking hubs along West Main Street and in downtown. We'll also be allowing VEO to have parking fees for misplaced vehicles, and I'll get into that more. Safety, we're asking them to implement an education mode for first ride or first couple rides, and I can give you more description on that as well. Equity, they'll be implementing a reduced price access program for low-income residents. And outreach, they will be conducting 2 outreach events per quarter, typically aimed at low-income residents or student populations. Next slide. All right, so these, I'm going to dive into more detail, and I'm going to go through these fast just so we don't get too sucked into all the details. But for the reduced per ride fee and remove per vehicle fee, we're dropping the fees basically down to 4 or 5% of their revenues instead of 12%, which is where we were before. That's more in line with what they're seeing in other markets, and in other markets they don't have a per vehicle fee. So we're pulling that out. That'll save us some time so that we don't have to track down how many vehicles they're putting on the road all the time. And it also, it's obviously a benefit for VEO. We are changing the higher max cap and not including any bonuses. This is to get back to the fleet flexibility issue. The current, or the previous regulations, it was just more onerous for us to keep track of. There were also some things written into it that had some loopholes that let them put as many e-bikes on our streets as they wanted to, which we wanted to stave them off from doing that. So now they have a cap of 700 vehicles total. Next slide.
Why have a cap at all?
Because they would put them everywhere if we didn't.
Oh, but then you'd always be able to find one.
Well, that's true.
I mean, as long as they're putting them in
that has not
reasonable,
been an issue,
compliant places.
That the public has come to us with as difficulty of finding a VEO scooter.
I think you're probably hearing from the public that isn't riding them mostly.
That's absolutely true.
It's absolutely difficult to find them a lot of the time, at least without walking like 5 blocks.
Okay.
And maybe less so around UVA, but certainly around here.
Well, I will say that the 700 will take us from where we're at now, which is about 450 to 700. So that's going to be a pretty significant increase. The other thing that I will mention is this doesn't just apply to VEO. This applies to anybody who wants to put a scooter on our streets. So if another company comes in and says, oh, well, you reduced the fees. Now it's a profitable place for us to do business. They can come in, they can apply for a permit and compete with Veo on our streets. And, you know, then we'll have 1,400 scooters.
Can you talk about the revenue impacts on this?
Yeah, so it's pretty minimal. The last year, the per vehicle fee, I believe, came in about $35,000. At the beginning of the year, there were some adjustments made after that, but yeah, we don't have anything that's dedicated to at the moment, so it's not really a big impact on us. It's more of a deterrent for them than it is a benefit for us at this point.
Have we collected that at this point?
Not for this year.
The 35,000 number, that is revenue to the city? Or
Yes.
revenue to, wow.
And then how much is the per ride total?
The per ride currently is 25 cents a minute. Oh, per ride. It's per minute that is actually reduced, I think.
Can you annualize that, I think, in years?
I'm sorry?
Can you annualize that, please?
Annualize
Or,
what?
well, like, how much did we get last year?
Right.
How much did we get
12%
last year?
that we got.
I think it was about 85.
Something.
So it's not chump change, but it's also, we don't have a dedicated use for it at the moment.
Staff member.
Sure, we can add some.
So for parking, the first thing we're going to do is try to implement parking hubs on West Main and in downtown, usually around areas where they're going to be bike parking, just so that they're co-located, as you know where to find bike parking, you know where to find Veo scooters. This is basically what UVA Grounds is doing, and this will be an extension of that down West Main Street to downtown. We're also going to be looking, once we have those installed, at the Rugby Grady area and JPA area as our sort of next areas to go to. This has been fairly successful on UVA grounds. I know that there are still some complaints about misparked scooters on UVA grounds. A lot of those are privately owned, and we get a lot of the same complaints about scooters on the downtown mall, so I can sympathize with that. The other thing that they will start doing that UVA doesn't have is they're going to start charging fees for people who park incorrectly. Right now, when you end a ride on a Veo scooter, it asks you to take a picture of where you parked. That picture currently goes in the garbage can. In the future, they will take complaints from residents and from me saying, hey, there's a misplaced scooter. They will compare that to the picture that they got from the user to make sure it isn't just somebody dragged the scooter to a bad place or tipped it over out of malice. And then if it turns out that the picture matches what we found when we went to pick up the scooter, that user will get charged a fee. It will be a fee through their user fees built into the Veo app. It won't be a, city enforcement issue. It won't be the police going down and knocking on someone's door for misplacing a scooter. But this now allows Veo to enforce some of the issues that we've had issues with, and makes them responsible for it instead of us. The fees are going to be low. The first offense will just be a warning. It'll eventually top out to $75 or a ban from the service.
Who keeps the fee money?
Yeah.
They keep the fee money.
So, do we
because
have
they're
a-
administering the enforcement.
Does that generate a moral hazard?
How so?
No, they should be looking for as many violations as they can. That's what we
Correct.
want, right?
And encouraging, practically encouraging sloppy parking, and if you want to be malignant about it.
Well, the next item is discouraging the sloppy parking, and they're in education mode. So when you get on the scooter now, it gives you some instructions the first time you get on of where you should park, how you should ride, where you shouldn't ride. And most people get on the scooter and hit next on those to get through it so they can turn on the scooter, and then they go full blast down the hill as fast as they can. What this will do is take them through those screens and then put the scooter into an education mode, which means you can only go 8 miles an hour on it. So in a lot of other markets, what you see is first-time users make up a vast majority of the crashes. a lot of the complaints. In other markets where they've tried this, slowing everyone down to that 8 miles an hour for the first or second or third trip has flattened that line, where the same amount of crashes are happening with early users as they are with seasoned users, because they're just not being as risky and they're being forced not to be as risky. So they will be implementing that. There is also a rider safety quiz. So when they get through that next of the instructions, they'll get to a quiz and say, oh, I should have done the homework on this so that I can actually ride this scooter. I should actually know where I'm supposed to ride and where I'm supposed to park. So we're having them implement that with the new permit. Next up.
I had a quick,
Yeah, sure.
actually, well, going back to the fines, I guess we still get the 5% from the fine that Vail makes on the parking, right? The revenue.
They would be collecting the fines themselves and keeping the fines themselves, but we get revenue for per ride.
Okay, we just get the rides.
Yeah.
The question I had, maybe it's something you guys will probably figure out, but on the hubs, it says if you don't park at a hub, you can get a fine. What if the hubs are full when you get to your destination?
So generally,
Or is it like just a collection of stuff together?
yeah, they're basically going to be like an empty parking space or an empty area that we have marked off. If it's completely full and you've parked very close to it, they are probably going to do anything about that. Their GPS isn't quite accurate enough, so as long as you're within like 5 to 10 feet of a space where you're supposed to be, they aren't going to have a system that's something that's misparked. So it wouldn't really probably be an issue.
So UVA has like two kinds of hubs, right? Like along McCormick, you can't park anywhere but in a hub.
That's right.
And then in other places, there are just hubs because it's, you know, people gravitate to the corrals, right?
Yeah, they have them split into enforcement and encouragement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so the hubs we're going to do across the city.
The initial ones that we're looking at on West Main and downtown will be enforcement.
I don't love that.
Okay. Do you mind saying why?
Yeah.
Just so I can.
I mean,
mean,
unless
it's
you
not
have
set in
one
stone
like
yet
literally
either.
on every corner, right? Like there are a lot of safe places you can correctly park like a single scooter, right?
Right.
And you lose a lot of the point-to-point benefit of a scooter, and you know the ability for the next user to be able to find it without walking. I mean, from here you'd have to go to Court Square or to Market Street Park to pick up a scooter right now, and it's not as good as like nearby. I mean, we definitely need them to be parked correctly when they're outside of a corral.
Right.
But you know, forcing them into corrals if there's only, you know, 3 corrals around downtown or whatever is it's harmful to users.
Yeah.
And you're discouraging use.
Yeah, that's fair. And we are looking at not just like 3 spots downtown. We are looking for a wider distribution around the downtown area. It's going to be more of a challenge along West Main just because of where bike parking is currently located and the space constraints along the sidewalk network there. We may have to look at potential spots in the roadway where we can set up a corral. And in that case, it may be smaller corrals that we do along the way, but that's an ongoing discussion we're having with Vail, how we locate those and how they work.
Thinking beyond students, we have tourists and we have commuter workers. Are there ways that we can address those needs with this service?
The commuter workers is going to be a more challenging one just because a lot of those are folks that are coming in from out of town and they're already in a car and not likely to take a scooter once they're in a car. And then the other, I'm sorry, what was the other group? The
Tourists.
Tourists.
With money.
Yeah, they are not the target of our outreach at this point. We can work with the Economic Development Office to see how we may be able to promote this, and I'm sure Vail would love to have that conversation, so that's a great idea.
Thank you.
So, I mean, commuters could be a target, right? Like if you're in Belmont or something, people do drive in from Belmont, I'm told, possibly. And, you know, if you have one around that are, you know, if they're in your neighborhood,
yeah,
then it could be doable to get to downtown where you work with it. And if not, or if you have to walk all the way to Avon or whatever, then less so, right?
Right. Yeah, and we may be able to make that expansion to, you know, neighborhoods like Belmont with our outreach as we are growing the fleet. right? So since most of the fleet is concentrated on West Main and UVA right now, we don't really have that opportunity to go to Belmont and say, you should ride a scooter. Go walk a half a mile to get one.
Yeah.
But as the fleet expands and we're able to have more coverage throughout the city, we may have that opportunity to do more of that.
Yeah, and sorry, I didn't realize we were talking about outreach. I was thinking just in coverage, and that's kind of where I'm skeptical of the cap. And
Oh,
maybe
okay.
you just want to have the cap in the areas where we have, too many of them, so that you allow them to spread out.
Yeah,
in
and,
the other
and
places,
that is
right?
something that VEO is open to, is talking about how they redistribute vehicles. In other markets, they do have very strict, like, you have to have this percentage of the fleet has to be on the south side of town, or things like that. We have
Yeah,
that.
usually for equity reasons, right?
Exactly. I know that Richmond has that built in, that they have to have a certain amount of their fleet in Southside Richmond for equity concerns. That could be something that we get into, but we're initially trying to do the outreach to low-income communities as part of our equity drive on this. But that could expand in the future.
I assume when they're doing that outreach, they're going to also put them in the neighborhoods, even if it's not mandated.
Right. Yeah, and their initial efforts have been focused on Friendship Court, West Haven. I think they'll be headed out to Prospect in a couple weeks. So.
Yeah, almost like the scooters do appear in Tinton Page.
Yeah.
Related to that, we are implementing a reduced price access program for low-income residents. So right now, when you get on a scooter, you have to pay the dollar to unlock it, and then you have to pay per minute, and it gets really expensive. With this program, users would pay $5 a month. They would get no unlock fee. So anytime they turn on a scooter, that $1, that's knocked off immediately. They get one free ride for up to 30 minutes every day. So one leg of their commute would be paid for. And then discounted per minute fee for any other ride. So I believe right now the per minute fee is 20 cents, and it would go down to 15 or 10. So it's not a huge decrease, but some sort of discount for the per ride fee. Individuals would qualify through any state or federal assistance program. VEO is open to, if we have a local assistance program that we want to incorporate into this, they're willing to accept that as well, as long as we recognize it. This has been used in other cities to great effect. In New York City, it's about 10 or 11% of users are part of this program. In Seattle, it's 40%. And they have a very large scooter program in Seattle. So that's a lot of low-income residents with a new mode for riding.
So when you say an assistance program that they're part of, like, what is that?
Like if they use Snap.
Okay.
And have evidence that they are using Snap, they can qualify for the program. If they live in public housing, they could qualify for the program.
How do children fit in?
They don't.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I don't know what the age
Yeah,
restrictions are.
sorry, that caught me off guard a little bit. They don't. They cannot rent the
It's 18 up.
scooters.
Okay.
Yeah, you have to be 18. So, lastly, I'll mention that they have to do 2 outreach events per quarter. They'd had requirements previously to do outreach, and just no one has been meeting them. Our previous vendors weren't meeting them. VEO hasn't been meeting them. Just this year, they have already done 4 outreach events, and what they call outreach events are fairly minor, but we are looking to have them participate in Bike to Work Week coming up in May, having them partner with some of our advocacy groups around town that are taking the lead on that, and promote both scooters, e-bikes, bikes, and pedestrians getting to work all in one package. So our outreach will be focused on making sure everybody knows how to park and getting some education on parking hubs as they start getting installed, telling people about education mode and how they can ride safely, where they can ride safely, where they shouldn't be riding, and educating folks about the VEO Access Program. And you want to go to the next slide, please? So we have adopted these new regulations, and we've informed VEO that they need to apply for a new permit under the regulations. Their current permit that's under the 2019 regulations is extended through, it's basically 60 days, so I think it's end of May. If they can get us an updated permit application before then, we'll start with the new regulations. They're sort of incentivized to put together that application more quickly because they get the reduced fees and they get an enhanced profit. We are currently working with them to identify hub locations and working with Public Works to figure out how we can get those on the ground. We're working with them to set up coordination for outreach on Bike to Work Week, and we expect that they will apply for a full year permit in December for 2024. The one thing that isn't in here that I think you'll all be interested to know about, that is going to be another thing that the bike ped coordinator and I need to work through once we hire that person, is that while we were going through these regulations, we did find one tool buried in our existing regulations that should help us with the parking, but it's going to take some coordination to figure out how we're going to pull that off. Currently buried in the regulations, if there is a complaint made about a scooter's parking, if Veo doesn't get to that scooter within an hour and I get to it first, I get to charge them $100. So there are a lot of complaints that we've had coming through in the past couple years. We need to figure out how we're going to race Veo to that scooter and be there at minute after the hour. So that is TBD, but that's what we're working towards. Move it and call Veo and say, hey, I'm at your scooter, you know what this means.
How does Veo know a complaint has been made?
We currently take complaints through their customer service line, through their email service, and through MySeville app.
How do you know it was made if it wasn't through MySeville?
They are reporting
How could
complaints
you
to
know?
me. They haven't given me
Live?
details on, not live, no, not live.
Can we get an auto forward so you can raise them better? Or?
We are hoping that folks will use MySeville app in general, because that helps us track it.
Okay.
That helps us use that tool once we figure out what to do with it.
Put it on MySeville and then wait 30 minutes and put it on.
Yeah, noted, because I told people to use their web form the other day, so.
Yeah, the easiest is probably emailing them. Every scooter has the customer service line and email address on it right next to the number of the scooter. So that's what they're going to ask for, is what's the number of the scooter, what's the location. That's all the information they need. So emailing them, probably the easiest route to go, but if you want me chasing them, put it in MySeville app.
Just for clarity on the you chasing it, is it whoever has your job who has that, or is it any city employee who's tasked with
It
this?
says that the city is able to do that.
So you could have a method of telling every city vehicle or tracking to.
That sounds like a
your-
nightmare for me, but yes, I
Well,
could do that.
I mean, utilities and public works, they can track every square inch, every vehicle where they are down to the foot. So you can just tell them and they can go get it.
A swarm of summer interns.
Send out an automated text to everybody and
exactly.
recoup
That's not how
costs.
departments work.
So I'm still stuck, and sort of on this note, I'm still stuck on this like requirement versus encourage thing when we have both options. Why not start with the encourage thing for downtown and West Main, see how it works, give you some chances to race and collect your $100, and see if the encouragement's enough, right? Before we take away, what I kind of think of as like a pretty major feature of the scooters, if you're a good citizen about it.
Yeah. Well, frankly, we're not married to just sticking with enforcement versus the other. And we can talk to Veo about if they have any data that supports whether we should go one way or the other. I think right now we're tending to lean towards the enforcement one just because we're giving them the powers of enforcement, and they're already kind of doing a similar thing along McCormick Road and UVA. And we're talking about extending it down a similarly heavily traveled corridor. So that's kind of that's the logic behind it. Whether it holds up to the data that they have and whether we should maybe go the other direction, that's still for us to decide.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I counter the corridors are kind of the same, but the distribution of scooters is very different, right? It's very dense at UVA, harder to find one around here. We're also giving them the power of like finding them when they find ones in bad places or have bad images, right? And so, that those two things combined could be enough.
Okay. Yeah. No, I can definitely talk to them about that. Any other questions on scooters before I move on to the next one?
Yeah, I'm concerned about time. Please, next.
Okay, next one. All right, so this one will actually be fairly short. I think it was brought up earlier this evening. This is the Safe Streets and Roads for All Action Plan. So as part of the bipartisan infrastructure law, there was a $5 billion discretionary program set aside for Safe Streets and Roads for All. It's basically $1 billion every year for the next 5 years. In order to get that funding, we need to have an action plan in place. So we partnered with TJPDC. They're the sponsors behind the grant to get this action plan. Communities all over the country submitted for this so that they could get action plans so that they can access this funding over the next 5 years. So it's not a surprise that everybody's talking about doing an action plan for safe streets right now. Our region was awarded over $800,000. That's the second highest amount in the entire state. Partly why we got that amount is we worked on it as a region. So we are working with TJPDC across Region 10, that includes all of the rural communities, to do our action plan together so that when we're done, we can coordinate what the implementation steps will need to be. Next slide. So what this is going to result in is a regional plan, but each of the chapters of that plan will focus in on a specific community. Our chapter, as it has been previously scoped out, and we're currently working to scope it out further, is going to have additional outreach and engagement compared to the other counties. That's largely because we have more modes. We have more modes and we have more people interacting with those modes in a tight space. So we're going to have more outreach and engagement within our city that's associated with this. You may get the sense that we have our own plan, each county has its own plan, but it is part of a bigger picture that will get melded into one plan. Currently, we are enrolled in an infrastructure boot camp for the implementation grants. So walking us through sort of what's going to be required for the next steps once we have this action plan in place. And the safety needs and data and funding availability that comes with this action plan and with our implementation grants that we'll apply for in the future, those are going to inform our near-term priorities. So I said this one was short. That's all I have on this one, unless there's another slide. No, there's not. So any questions on Safe Streets and Roads for All? Yeah, that one's pretty straightforward. So
When do we start seeing projects done?
So right now we are scoping it with USCOT and the consultant that has been selected. I think we have a scoping meeting next Thursday. And then we should be kicking off probably in May. Not sure exactly when the outreach events will be happening, but we will have quite a few of them over the next year.
What are the odds we're done by the next fiscal year's funding cycle? Or will we have to wait 2 years before we can get the real, infrastructure money?
I think it's 2 years. Yeah. Especially given when we're actually starting this one. It's about a year process, so it's going to probably leak into the 2-year time frame. All right, so I will jump on to the next one. This is my last topic, and this is near and dear to my heart, as it was what set me on my path to become a planner in the first place, which is prioritizing bike and pedestrian facilities. So our comp plan identifies several documents in the Transportation Master Plan, as I mentioned up front. That includes the Bicycle and Pedestrian Master Plan from 2016, the 2016 Streets That Work Plan, the ADA Transition Plan, which I believe is from 2017 or 2018, CAT's Transit Development Plan, which is from 2018, I believe, as well, and several small area plans. So when you look at all of these plans as a whole, as our Transportation Master Plan, you'll realize some of these priorities don't really align with each other. We're all talking about a world pre-pandemic. We're talking about a community pre-pandemic. Some of those folks have left Charlottesville. New folks have come in. We also are not accounting in our priorities across these plans for staffing changes that have happened in the past 6 years. We've had quite a bit of staffing changes within the city, and staffing levels have changed as well. So these plans are very optimistic about what they could get done in the next 5 to 10 years. And now we're sitting with these plans and thinking, ooh, we really oversubscribed ourselves here. So we realized that these were all issues that needed to be solved. Next slide, please. So we knew that we had to bring all of these priorities together and figure out what to do with them. So we applied for grant assistance through OIPI. That's a state office of intermodal planning and investment that's under the Secretary of Transportation's office. They were also assisting TJPDC on setting up their prioritization process. So we brought in a consultant team that would develop a process, largely looked at quantitative metrics for key needs under that process, which has output scores that we are reviewing as through a qualitative analysis. All of the analysis was performed on projects identified in the Bike Ped Master Plan and in the Streets That Work Plan. So there are some old projects that we're looking at, but have been vetted by the community at one point, and now we are bringing those two plans together and kind of marrying them together. So to date, our consultant is done with the quantitative part of it. We've gotten all of their work out of it, all these maps, lots of spreadsheets. And now we're looking through all of these projects internally and making sure that they still make sense. So if you can go to the next slide. So this is sort of an overview of the process. The left half of what you're looking at is the quantitative assessment. That's what our consultant worked on. And the right half is our qualitative assessment. From the left, you can see the Bike Ped Master Plan and Streets That Work projects in that green bubble feeding into the quantitative assessment, which looks at suitability. So what kind of bike score or walk score does it have? Are there schools nearby? Is there transit nearby? Is this a really hilly area? It looks at demand, both in terms of what is sort of the latent demand from zone to zone around the city, as well as what is the actual travel that is happening on the streets. It looks at connectivity, so what are the segment links that we're looking at, and how does that fit in with the network? Some of that also with segment length and with slopes, and some of these also kind of get to how expensive is this thing going to cost us. And lastly, it looks at safety in terms of crash density, and also in terms of, how many automobile vehicles are on the road next to these bike and ped facilities. These all get smushed into a final score that provides us a list to look at qualitatively. Qualitatively, we are looking at how does this impact equity? So, are all of these projects concentrated in parts of town where they may not get used, where they may not be meeting the demand of low-income residents? Are we spreading this around equitably throughout the city? We're also looking at feasibility in terms of funding. Do we really think we're going to be able to pull the money together to build this thing? In terms of physical, there are some old projects that we were looking at, 7, 8 years ago, that the landscape has changed a little bit since then, and that project may not be physically feasible anymore. And then the last bit, I said 3 to 5 years. We're more so looking at sort of near term versus medium term versus long term. So are there projects that we can get done within the next 5 years using the funding that we know is available, and that they're easy enough feasibility wise so that we can get them on the ground? Or is it more of a project where it might take us 10 years to do it because we have to go out and get smart scale funding, or we have to get a federal funding source, and it's a bigger project and it's going to take longer to construct? And lastly, feedback from stakeholders and potential synergies with other projects. So we have hundreds of projects listed. Are there 2 good projects that would be a great project if we paired them together? That sort of thing. From that qualitative assessment, which is happening right now, I'm sitting in meetings with city engineering and working through a lot of these issues in terms of paving schedule and feasibility and project synergies. But once we get through that, as well as collecting stakeholder input, we will have a prioritized list, and it won't be a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It'll probably more, here's tier 1 of the projects that we we think we can get done quickly and should really be turning on the jets to work on. Here's tier 2 of things that, you know, we're gonna need a little bit more work. And here's tier 3 of if we get tier 1 and tier 2 projects done, or if a really good opportunity comes up, we might go after that. So we're probably gonna come back to you with a list that looks more like that than a prioritized 1 through 60 list of projects. You will notice that there's a little box off to the side that says Sharrows. When we were looking through the bike facilities, a lot of the stuff that came up from 2015, 2016 was shared lanes or Sharrows. We didn't want to list these as project priorities because they're not really projects. What we're going to do with these is hand these over to public service so that they can incorporate them into their paving schedule, and just that can be an automatic thing. We don't need to have more discussions about whether to put the paint of a bike picture on the ground. We're just going to let public service run with that list of priorities for Sharrows and consider that done. What we will have is bike facilities and sidewalks out of this plan. There are lots of things that aren't in the plan, but those 2 things will be covered by these prioritizations. Can I go to the next slide?
You're familiar with the recent research on Sharrows and fatalities?
I'm not sure what you mean, but go for it.
Give it a look.
Okay.
It's grim.
And that they are promoting?
Yeah.
Okay, that is grim.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we are, we don't want to say that that's like our infrastructure is just Sharrows. So we're focused more on sidewalks and bicycle facilities. We are currently working through the qualitative assessment, and we'll have a draft list of priorities to share. We'll be engaging stakeholders on those, including y'all, to give your feedback on what those draft priorities are, and then we'll revise the list and take it to council for adoption. Once we get council to adopt it, is not the end of the road. This is something that we're going to have to look at annually to make sure that we don't get 6 years down the line and say, oh, what were we doing with bikes and pedestrians? We're going to be doing this annually to make sure that we're pursuing projects that are going to continue being feasible. And we're going to be documenting lessons learned about our prioritization process and how that's playing out year to year. Because down the line, we are going to have to start from scratch, basically, and figure out what are the inputs for the projects that we want to prioritize. Because right now, we're working off a list from 2015, 2016. We're going to have to revisit that and do an even better job with the prioritization in the future. So that's what we have to look forward to once we get to the end of this process, but we have some work to get there. Any other questions on this one?
So I heard you mention funding. So I understand, we, council, the administration has kind of removed most of the bike ped funding out of the CIP in the last 3-4 years because we don't need it, because we have so much money piling up because we can't spend it. At what point will you be ready for us to spend or to fund things again?
I think when you start hearing city officials complain less about staffing, you'll know. That's currently the biggest holdup for us is staffing levels. And we could spend money if we had staff. It's just a matter of getting the right people in the door and getting them out at their desks in City Hall. Any other concerns?
Something I've noted in recent debates over bicycle and pedestrian facilities is that generally, at some level, there is a reallocation of space from private motor vehicles to anything else. And that rallies people who have private motor vehicles, like myself, who then say, hey, but my space, you can't take it. And the project dies.
Right.
That seems like a bad formula. Is there any way that we can separate allocation for private motor vehicles from safe space for everything else?
The constraint there is the right-of-way that we have available. So that's a major issue here in town because we have some very, very old streets and some very, very old right-of-way property. Within a lot of those constrained areas, no, there's really not a lot that we can do to separate. There are areas in town, and I'm thinking Fitz, for example, where you have a lot of right-of-way, you have a large area, you could do something completely separated and protected there. if you have the support from the public to do that. That's the other element of it is the public is also going to weigh in on that private vehicle versus bike ped trade-off, and we're kind of at the whim of them in terms of the feedback that we get from them and how we pursue projects going forward.
My concern is that I expect that feedback will come, but we don't hear from the people who need safe space.
Yeah.
Because they aren't there yet. They aren't using it yet.
Yeah,
It's difficult to balance.
I have had conversations with some advocacy groups in town that I think are keeping an eye out for that because they do want to have more users on the streets of the modes that they're trying to promote. So, making sure that we're having not just good facilities for people who know how to ride a bike or feel comfortable walking down a busy street, but also providing facilities for kids. That's a big issue in our city right now. Is kids need bike ped facilities to get to school because we don't have as many school buses as we used to. So there is a focus on making sure that those less confident users and less experienced users do have safe facilities, which is going to mean more protected bike facilities and less sharrows.
Other concerns or questions on this one?
Not a concern. Just want to say it's pretty amazing. Can't wait to see the list. Thanks.
Me too. Thank you. Anything else?
Good work.
All
Thank
right.
you.
Well, that's all I have this evening. You'll have a good rest of your night. Thank you.
I believe we have one item left called zoning ordinance. How are we feeling?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm a little tired myself.
Let's kind of roll through it and get it done.
Maybe a brief one?
Brief what?
Brief zoning ordinance
Yeah,
discussion?
yeah.
Well,
James wants to go home early.
Keep it short.
As we noted earlier, we don't have anything to add tonight. We had hoped to bring something, but
That was brief.
we got what we got right now, and what we have is preparations for the 2 open house events this week, and then working to get Module 3 out the door. Not this week. We will update as soon as we can when that is going to happen.
All right, thank you. Questions, comments on this issue? I would entertain a motion at this time.
I would like to move to adjourn.
I hear a motion. Do I hear a second?
I have a second.
I heard a motion and second. Can I see thumbs? I see thumbs. Good night, all. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz.
There you go.